Good morning, everyone. Today is 12 January, the year 2004. I'm Dr. Dave Thompson, a volunteer at the Palm Springs Air Museum here in California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in our country's military conflicts. Today, I'm here at the museum, along with fellow volunteer Howard Gilbert. Today, we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Colonel Frank Hurlbut. Colonel Hurlbut was a P-38 pilot in North Africa during World War II. So we're going to talk to him about that and a lot of other things. It's nice to have you here, Frank.
It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Frank, first of all, can you tell us where and when you were born?
I was born in Park City, Utah in July 20th, 1922. But I grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, and went to school there till I graduated from high school.
Tell me, Park City, how long did you live there?
Well, my father and grandfather had one of the two drugstores in Park City, and so soon after I was born, my mother and father had a divorce, and so I selected my father and family to live with, as did my older sister Catherine, and they had a home in Salt Lake City, in a, you might say, a nice area near East High School and so forth. And so I grew up actually in Salt Lake, but I would spend my summers in my father's and grandfather's drugstore up in Park City.
Our daughter and her family, right after Christmas, well, I guess it was last week, it was her birthday. They went to Park City, went skiing and with the kids and had a great time.
Beautiful. It's really developed, hasn't it?
Apparently. So I've not been there, but they say I'm sure it has. Yeah. What was it like when you would go there in the summer?
Well, they had the Silver King mine there. That's what Park City was built around. And I used to ride these horses I'd get for 25 cents an hour and try and, you know, go around the mountains and so forth. And so it was a little town, kind of on a real upslope. And I happened to go back, maybe about 5 years ago, and to see if the drugstore was still there, because my father and grandfather, of course, have both passed away. And I found it, and I couldn't believe how small it was, because to me it was a very large store when I was there. But most of the things in the whole town are what they call, historical monuments, and
right.
So they keep them.
Now, your dad and your grandfather, you said they both were in the drugstore business there?
You're both pharmacists.
Pharmacists. And where did your grandfather come from? What's the ancestors of your family on that side?
Well, I'm not exactly certain. I think Milwaukee is where the family kind of started out and then moved to Wyoming. And we used to have a lot of horse equipment, such as saddles and bridles, down in our basement in Salt Lake. And we were kind of always, you might say, Westerners in that part of the area. They were. My grandfather had a rather unique thing I would like to maybe mention.
Yeah, please.
That I found was very interesting. I'm sure you've heard of, let's see, who were the two men that went to Africa?
Stanley and Livingston?
Stanley and Livingston. Well, when I was about 15, I'll take that back, when I was about 12, my father gave me a belt with S on it, and I asked him what the S was for, and had a hunting knife on it, so it was a lot of fun for me to carry. It's a very nice knife and all, and good for camping. And what happened is that my grandfather used to do a lot of hunting, and he knew Stanley, who went to Africa, and Stanley had asked him to accompany him on his trip to find Livingston.
Mm-hmm.
But he decided to stay where he was, and as a result, I'm able to tell you this story because if he had gone, he would never marry my grandmother, and then I wouldn't be here to tell you this.
That's funny. That's interesting. And is that a English name, Hurlbut? I mean, did they?
It's an English name, right?
And do you know when the Hurlbuts first came to America from England?
No, but I think they came over right around the time of the Mayflower.
Really? And your mother, what was her maiden name? And what was your dad's name? Was he?
He was Frank Stanley Hurlbut. My grandfather was Frank Booker Hurlbut, and I'm Frank Damon Hurlbut.
Was Stanley named after the Stanley?
Yes, he was named after Stanley, that's right.
And your mom's maiden name and her name, her first name?
Her name was Mary Huddy, and she lived in Park City. And when my father went overseas in World War I as a private, even though he was a college graduate with a engineering degree, why he was put in the infantry, and they filled his division up with from the prisons. So it was a mighty tough division. And I had a dentist in Salt Lake that was over there in the same division with him, and he used to tell me a little bit about what my dad used to tell me, and I was able to verify it, is that in this tough division, my dad used to fight, you know, on weekends as exhibitions. And there was only one person in the whole division he couldn't whip, and he was about 8.5 feet tall. And my dad was about 6.5 feet tall.
Really?
But he could hit like a powerhouse, and so this dentist, who was a very fine dentist in Salt Lake, told me that was all true. And in fact, I think he spent part of his time running around in a train that somebody in his engineering division stole, and so they ran around France in this stolen train. And then my father came back and met my mother, and they were married, and they had little problems, and so they got a divorce.
And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
I have an older sister, Catherine June Hurlbut, and twin sisters who are younger. One of which is deceased at this time.
And your mother, you said Huddy. How do you spell her maiden name, your mom?
Huddy.
Did your father remarry?
My father finally remarried after I joined the National Guard when I was 17 years old. Actually, I was 18 by then. And he married a teacher, and so he continued his life still as a druggist, even though he was an educated engineer for the rest of his life.
Oh. Where did he go to college?
He went to the University of Utah.
But he had an engineering degree, huh?
Right.
Oh, okay. And his second wife, what was her, do you remember her maiden name?
Her name was Kathleen, and she was a school teacher. And they lived in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I came back when I came back from overseas in combat. And then they moved on to Falls Church, Virginia, and my father finally came back to the coast in Santa Monica, where he eventually passed away.
When you were growing up as a kid, I guess it was kind of during the Depression when you grew up. Did that impact your family very much?
Yes, very much. What with the divorce problems, which always naturally is expensive, particularly when two people are kind of fighting out who has the children and so on and so forth. And then the Depression came along, and we finally lost the drugstore in Park City. It was kind of a unique thing because I went to Longfellow grade school, and about the time I was in 5th grade, my grandfather passed away from cancer. And I lived in Salt Lake with my grandfather and grandmother, who was his mother and father, my father's mother and father, and my aunt, who was a Christian Scientist and secretary in Salt Lake, and well up in the so-called power positions in that area. But my aunt finally passed away about that time, and my grandmother became quite old and you might say senile, and was finally in a nursing home. So it ended up that my sister and I, when I was age 11, in effect raised ourselves, because my father would be up in the drugstore in Park City trying to eke out a living. And I remember that we didn't have very much, even though I went to a very nice high school, the East High in Salt Lake, which is the rich kids' side. I had one pair of Levi's and maybe a couple of shirts, and I used to walk to school a couple of miles every day until I did finally graduate and so forth.
One
But
question.
we were very happy. It was amazing. We got along very well. We took care of the house, and it was a nice big house. And you might say raised ourselves. And I guess some people would think, why, we might have gone off the bad end and done a lot of bad things, but I was the kind of kid that when somebody would swear in front of my sister, I'd beat them up.
I meant to tell you, if you can jump in here and ask questions.
Oh, fine, okay.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, you say your aunt was Christian Scientist. How did that dovetail in with the pharmacy business? Did they not, I know they don't have doctors very much. What about drugs? Do they take drugs and things?
Well, I think, much as I hate to say it, it seemed to me that being a Christian Scientist, where they would not have any doctor type assistance, my aunt, who had breast cancer, refused to get any assistance and so on, and went through a lot of agony before she passed away. There was really no dovetailing between Christian Scientists and the drug business, however.
No, what I meant was, did they also frown upon taking drugs, the Christian Scientist people?
I really don't know. I only was quite impressed with the fact that she wouldn't allow a doctor to help her,
Right, yeah.
or go to a hospital.
Did you have jobs when you were a kid?
Yes, I worked in a drugstore delivering prescriptions and things that people would order. I had a paper route and so on for a while. I really had a kind of an easy life in a way, even though I didn't have anything. I didn't realize I didn't really have anything other than that my friends were well dressed and had plenty of money that were up there in East High. But I didn't really have to work. I was able to get along pretty well without working too hard.
Were you Mormons?
Well, none of us were Mormons. I was Episcopalian, and I'm really not too sure what that is. But one of the reasons I felt that I needed to get out of Utah is because it seemed like that if you were, unless you were a Mormon, you weren't going to ever really do very much, and I had other plans, such as I always wanted to be a fighter pilot.
When did you first start getting interested in aviation?
Well, I was, like most youngsters, I was interested in airplanes, and I love fighters, and so I would make them, little models, and hang them on the ceiling, so every time I'd go to bed at night and wake up in the morning, why, I'd look up and see those fighters. And so I always planned on eventually going to college, getting at least 2 years, and then it never occurred to me that I might not pass the physical, or might not be accepted, or, you know, might wash out or anything. But when I watched the newsreels and so on and saw the P-26s flying, and then I would bicycle out to Salt Lake City airport and so forth with a friend and get to see a B-18. That was the first Army Air Corps airplane I was ever in, because I was able to get in and look around the cockpit a little bit. Yeah. And I always planned on flying.
Did you play any sports in school?
Pardon me?
Did you play any sports in school?
Well, yes. I did a lot of boxing and so on. I was pretty much trained by my dad. I guess I could have been a semi-pro or something at my weight, because I got some pretty good training.
Was your dad a professional boxer?
Well, as I was saying, he fought when he was in the division in France in World War I, and there wasn't anybody he couldn't beat except that 8.5 foot tall man. It must have been like steel. But I did track and let's see, what did I do? I was a hurdler and a 100-yard dash man, basically, and played football, you might say the C team, that were made up of a little smaller fellows. 'Cause I was about 5'11" really, and that was nowhere near, with about 135, 40 pounds. It wasn't quite big enough to make it to the big leagues.
So what year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated from high school in 1941. We spent a fair amount of time. My dad used to like to travel. He built a trailer. We'd go down to Santa Monica, or Muscle Beach, and I'd see all these beautifully built, you know, fellas and beautiful women. They'd be putting them over their head and doing all kinds of acrobatics. And I asked him, because the war had, it looked like it was going to be starting, and I asked him, how come you're not, you know, one of the draftees and so on? Strangely enough, these beautifully built fellows were almost all stuntmen in the movies up in Hollywood, and most of them had bad hearts and high blood pressure, couldn't get in the service.
That's strange. So did you start college in the fall then?
No, when I was 17 and a half, why I decided I would join the National Guard. My father said, you know, I was a good boy, but I needed a little discipline, so I thought it was probably a good way to go. So I was in the National Guard in Salt Lake, the 145th Field Artillery, which is a part of the 40th Division, but the 145th was in Salt Lake. And they had 70mm cannon and so forth, and World War I vintage, I must say, plus everything else we had was from World War I, uniforms and hats and you name it. And I was there for a year, and then they federalized the National Guard and brought all the federalized troops from the different states, Nevada, Utah, California, and so on, down to San Luis Obispo and put us into training. And because America was so unprepared for war, we used to use stovepipes for cannons, even though we had 4 cannons that we would actually load up for certain maneuvers. We used to use broomsticks for guns. We used to have troop maneuvers, and they'd have an AT-6 trainer come over and they'd throw out a flour sack or something, and if you were about 100 yards from it, well, then you were all dead, that type of thing with umpires. But they finally started getting equipment and so forth and moved up to 105s. And
it's a 105mm Hauser.
Yeah, Hauser, right. Mm-hmm. And I was in the communications section as a signal corporal, and I tried to learn everything I could so I could be as efficient with them as possible. And then I was really quite worried, how am I ever going to get out of here, because we're getting ready to send this division, they say, to the Philippines to help MacArthur retake it. That's what I found out later, toward the end.
Okay, let's just back up for a second and tell me what you were doing on December 7th, 1941.
At the time, which was before I became a corporal, I was walking guard in the rain when Pearl Harbor was hit. And I was walking guard, interestingly enough, on Sunday, later, I guess it was a Sunday evening, down at the motor pool with a gun on my shoulder in this cold, sleazy rain, and the fellow that came up from one side on his post was a Japanese fellow. And we stopped and talked for a couple of minutes, you know, before we turn around and go back on our duty. And I said, he told me, he says, so my wife just went back to Japan to see her parents, and now the war has started. And I said, well, what are you going to do? You know, she can't get back. He says, that's right. She's no good to me now.
Oh my.
But anyway, I was in the orderly room one day, and some orders came through that they would accept enlisted men as aviation students in the aviation cadet program, because they needed pilots so bad. And if you could pass the physical, if you could pass the board, if you could get 3 recommendations from commanding officers, why, and everything worked out, why they would let you go on TDY, you might say, temporary duty into the Army Air Corps and become trained for a cadet, and if you washed out, you had to go back and go with them, and I didn't want to do that, that's for sure. But here was my chance to become a pilot, even without the college and even without being 20, 21 years old.
Well, you're about 18 then, is that right?
I was just, yeah, right, 18, just coming up on 19. And so I came in and they mixed us up with all the cadets, and we had the same instructor. Each instructor had, I think it was 6 students, 3 aviation students who were going to be sergeant pilots, and 3 second lieutenants, aviation cadet type people. Well, you couldn't tell the difference between us because we were all doing the same thing, the same ground school, the same everything, same aircraft, the same program. And I was very fortunate, and in 6 months I was a flying staff sergeant. I graduated from Luke Field. I had gone to Hemet for primary.
Oh, go ahead.
PT-22 Ryan aircraft, BT-13s in Minterfield at Bakersfield, and then Luke Field and AT-6s.
And that's in Arizona, right?
That's in Arizona. That's, in fact, right today, that's the largest fighter training station, I think, in the United States, probably in the world, because they have what, F-14s, F-16s, F-18s, and so forth, that type of thing. But anyway, the first fighter I ever flew was a P-36, which had a shotgun starter, where you put a shotgun shell in and hit it, and it cranks the prop around, and if you do everything right and get the mixture on, why it would go. And it was the forerunner of the P-40, except it was radial engine. And they had a P-43 there that we could fly, or the P-36, and I got the 36. Then I think almost everybody, the second lieutenants and so on, who were predominantly there, and the flying sergeants, all wanted to be fighter pilots, it seemed. And no matter how big they were or how small they were, they all wanted to be fighter pilots. And I was very lucky because I happened to have, my last name was H, and so I fell into the group that was going to go to fighters. So everything was working out, and they sent me to Tallahassee, Del Mabry Field, Florida, and what they did is they had 2 hangars on the field, and they put the officers in the one hangar and the sergeant pilots in the other, and divided up the airplanes, gave us each 30 P-39s, and then we started our training. And of course, there was very little an instructor could do, but we did have officer instructors. He could check us out, and then we had to go on up because it's a single-engine fighter, as you know. Well, it was interesting. I was there for 3 months, and the P-39, I found, to my great surprise, was probably the most dangerous fighter the American Air Force or Army Air Corps had ever had. With the engine behind you and the type of wing they have and so forth, if you were doing acrobatics and you put it on its back and got down to about 165 miles an hour and then pulled the stick back, the airplane would not only snap, but it wouldn't even spin, it would tumble completely out of control, and if you weren't above about 8,500 feet, you didn't have a chance to get it out, it seemed. Well, a lot of people were killed there. Fortunately, not too many sergeants were killed. And the officers lost so many of their P-39s, they crashed all of theirs. We had to give them half of ours. And I don't know why that occurred, but I always thought, hey, sergeant pilots know a little bit about flying. So anyway, maybe it's because they were younger and they had to try harder, because our washout rate in school for the sergeants and the second lieutenants, but particularly the sergeants, was very high. And so you did the slightest thing wrong, you were out of the program. And even they lost some mighty fine pilots who were really good, but maybe had one little thing happen or had a bad day, and they were gone. And that was a shame, because America needed all the pilots they could get, particularly the good ones. And this is an interesting thing that I went through in my career, was that, you know, the flying officers who had already been in the service and were flying weren't too sure they wanted to have sergeant pilots in their organization because they thought maybe they'd be lower quality, maybe not as good for depending on, wouldn't have the military whatever it takes to be a flyer. And it was good to find out that, in fact, later they started supposedly giving flight officer rank, and that finally came out and got standard for the Air Force at that time, Army Air Corps. That they'd pick maybe the so-called poor second lieutenants or officers and give them flight officer, and the ones that were good that could march well and all that stuff, and be good ODs, officer of the day and so on, well, they make them second lieutenants. Well, as it turned out, flight officers, because they were maybe had a little more daring for some reason, which made them maybe a little poor military but better flyers, they stayed alive in most cases, where many of the lieutenants that I was with didn't make it. And it was an interesting thing.
You talked about the officers, but you said, was this part of cadet training though, Frank? Because it was a lot, you were cadets before.
This is later, too.
Later, afterwards.
Later,
But you went through cadet training though, you say, too?
Yeah, we went through with the officers, and when we graduated and became staff sergeant pilots.
Mm-hmm.
And the officers that had 2 years college and were a little bit older, they became second lieutenants. It was kind of interesting because we found that a lot of our people at various times were picked up by the military police for wearing wings, and the adjutant or the commander of our organization had to go down and get them out of the pokey because they said enlisted men can't fly. Because the Army, you know, although they had a few sergeant pilots from the time of the Wright brothers who used to be their mechanics and so on and knew the airplanes, so they became trained. And there was a few of them through the years, and even though the Marines had them, and I guess the Navy might have had some and so on, the Army had very few. And so when I went through, they were graduating something like 3,000. And I was just lucky enough to be in that group.
And that would have been, what year was that you graduated from cadet school then?
Okay, I went through in 42H, and that would be in 1942.
Right. And so where did you go from there?
Well, they told us when we were at Dale Mabry Field that they wouldn't send the sergeants over, which were, you know, about half the people there, because they couldn't trust an enlisted man with a expensive airplane. Couldn't sign for it and so on. So, and we found that they sent us anyway. They put us on the Queen Elizabeth, and there were 90 of us that were sergeant pilots, and Bob Hoover, which you may have heard, was the leader of our group. He was a sergeant pilot too.
He was in the Tokyo Raiders. Is he the one? No, I was thinking different Hoover then.
No, Bob was just a well-known stunt pilot.
Yeah, that's right.
In fact, Jimmy Doolittle at one time was introducing him later. I want to introduce you to the finest, I think it's because it's in the book, the finest acrobatic pilot alive. And then he said, I take that back, I want to change that. He says, I want to introduce you to the finest acrobatic pilot that ever lived. Mm-hmm. And that was Bob Hoover. Yeah. And Bob's a good friend of mine.
And he was your CO?
No, he was just a guy that was appointed from the flying sergeants, because he was the tallest, I think, to be in charge of our group. I see, okay. And so when we were finally made flight officers over in England, and I guess we were the first flight officers to ever be made over there.
So what is a flight officer? How does that fit in the ranks?
Flight officers were considered third lieutenants. They're like a warrant officer, except they wore a blue bar. I happened to have flown from Tallahassee when I heard about the flight officer thing up to Pensacola, and went to their PX, and they had some in the PX. So I bought 2 or 3 sets. I think I bought 3 sets, and then flew back. Flew up there in the T6 and came back. And so when we got over there, I think I had the first flight officer bars that were ever in England. And I still have some in my things, so I can see where it all started, kind of.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were told that they were going to put us in the Eagle Squadron, and because that's where Americans that were flying for the British and so on were a part of. But they decided, because they brought the Eagle Squadron into the American Air Force, into the Army Air Corps, I should say, why they decided to send us to Africa. So they put us in a convoy, and we went on, I think there were about 30 ships in our convoy, and we went to Iran. And we had a group of about 50 flying sergeants, former flying sergeants who were flight officers, because this major over there decided we'd heard that we should be flight officers. He didn't know what it was, so he stopped us there and wired Washington, for the information and authority to make us flight officers, and then we could get in the officers club. I remember one time while we were over there, they wanted us to listen to Wing Commander Donaldson, who was a famous British flyer, and so we went over to the officers club, and we sat on the floor around this officers club room that he was giving his talk, because he was trying to tell us something about combat. But the British had a different type of combat than we ever had, because they seemed to be flying around over London and so forth in trail and doing things like that and doing what they had to do, and they did a marvelous job. But I found when we got down in Africa and we were doing, had to have flights of 4 crossing back and forth to protect the bombers, because most of my missions, I'd say 35 or 40 missions out of my 50, were protecting B-25s and so on, and I can tell you a little bit about that later. But
so by this
the
time,
interesting thing
go ahead.
that I was trying to kind of mention was that they wanted to give us the combat information when we were over in England, so we listened to Wing Commander Donaldson in their officers club. But because we were sergeants, we weren't supposed to be in an officers club. But they did let us sit on the floor. Well, when they finally, and of course we used to eat at the enlisted mess for the enlisted men, wherever we were. Well, we made flight officers, we were no longer enlisted, so they decided we couldn't eat in their mess anymore. The officers didn't think we were officers, so we couldn't eat in their mess. We thought we were going to starve to death.
No
and
McDonald's
we got made flight officers on the 21st of December of 1942.
So when you got to North Africa, what plane were you flying then? What did the squadron
I
have?
was a P-39 pilot. I
So
had
had P-39s.
70 hours.
Okay.
We found a P-39N, I believe it was, at one of the bases I was at. We went into Stone, England, and we were transferred to this RAF training base flying Spitfires and so forth. And I found a P-39, and this other friend of mine who was a sergeant pilot, Midaw, he and I were able to get a hold of that airplane, get some time over in England. And the other guys didn't know about it. We didn't tell them. And then we flew Cubs and so forth to get our flying time. I remember I was trying to pick a fight. You always try and pick a fight when you're a fighter pilot so you get more experience. Even if it's an airliner, they'll fight with you, which means turn toward you. But because we knew we didn't have much time, I had 210 hours in the flying school, 70 hours in a P-39, and really, the Germans had thousands of hours and so forth because they'd been flying ever since the Spanish War, and we knew we were going to be up a creek, so to speak, and we didn't get all the time we could get. So anyway, it took me about an hour to get this Cub up to about 3,500 feet, and you know, climbing as hard as I could. Then I'd try and show him that I was trying to fight with him by leading him, and of course you had no trouble because you never went anywhere. You just turned on a little dime, so to speak. And he finally got the idea I was trying to fight with him, so he tried to turn with me and he lost. But he went off, and I couldn't see him anywhere because of this high wing and this cub. And all of a sudden, why, here he comes from behind me, right up in front of me, and put me in his wash and nearly tore my wings off. So that taught me not to fight with a Spitfire. And he won for sure. I was lucky it still had wings on it and didn't fall apart on me. But I remember that England was the one place I was able to fly an airplane backwards. And you did that because of the air that came rushing through the valleys and so forth. You could slow the cub down to the point where the airplane, if you looked at the ground, would be going the wrong way. And so that was, I thought, an interesting thing, flying one backwards, even though I thought it was going forward. When we got down to Africa, into Iran, of course, the British were coming up from Suez Canal area and Tripoli and so forth on up on the coast toward Sicily. And Patton's organization, his troops that were coming in from Casablanca, that area where they had first come in. And let's see, what was I trying to tell you? Oh, when we got there to Africa, we found that nobody knew we were coming. Nobody had a job for us, and it was like we were, you know, just lost children out there. They even suggested that we go join a ground forces army camp in near Oran until they could figure out what to do with us. Well, we weren't about to get near the army because we figured they might keep us. So we went down to the local airport, the military airport somewhere close to Oran, and we just slept in this hangar on the floor. And I forget where we got anything to eat, but we weren't about to get near that army camp. They finally, after about 2.5 weeks, brought 3 C-47s in and flew the whole bunch of us down to Casablanca, which was back in Morocco. They had decided that we should start a fighter training replacement pool, so we were the cadre to start that. And we did it on a abandoned air base that had a runway and a few buildings on it, fairly close to Casablanca. And so what we did is we picked up all the P-40 pilots that were wandering around North Africa, the P-39 pilots who were wandering around North Africa, and the P-38 pilots, as well as all of the airplanes we could find, the P-39s, P-40s, and P-38s. And we were under a gentleman that didn't have a job, so they gave him the position of running the school. That was Colonel Stone. We became known as Colonel Stone's 67 Thieves. Oh, I was going to tell you about the 67. There was 50 flight officers and 17 second lieutenants, all fighter pilot types, with fighter backgrounds, and not much time, but they called us fighter pilots. That when we found out that nobody wanted us and didn't look like we were ever going to get a job, we decided unofficially to become the 67 Sad Sacks. So we became a little bit famous in, or was it infamous, in North Africa because we had our jackets, we had what do you call it? You put on your jacket, you know, and so on. So we became the Colonel Stone's 67 Thieves when we got back to Barsheed and started this training organization, because we needed to get all the airplanes we could get and all the pilots we could get. And the pilots, for instance, that came off the Ranger, they flew a bunch of P-40s off the Ranger.
Yep.
Those people, as I remember it, came and joined our group if they didn't have somebody that had already assigned them to a P-40 outfit somewhere in Africa. And so we all picked up a little bit more time.
One of our docents, Aaron Lippy, came over on the range with the P-40s.
Oh,
but
really?
he went on to China.
Oh, yeah.
With it, so you'll enjoy talking to him about that.
That's
Well-
when you started flying the 38s, though, Frank?
Well, yes. There's a couple of humorous things I might like to mention, though. It's kind of seemed funny to me, at least. When some of our guys would, like, for instance, they go down to the docks and so on, they'd find a truck that nobody had picked up or wanted and so on, so they'd just get in and drive it away. And we got our desks and our places to sleep, our bunks, and everything for the offices and everything for the flying, where we could find it. And we talked to the colonel, and he said, well, don't worry about it. He says, there's a war going on. This will all be put on the record when there's time for him to come through and take an inventory of everything. So in the meantime, don't worry about it. So we had motorcycles and everything. But the fellows that picked up some of the P-39s over at the Casablanca airport were being put together by the French. And unfortunately, they had put their horizontal stabilizer controls in backwards. So when you pull the stick back, it would go down and so on. So you had to kind of watch out what you were doing. But we had quite a number of airplanes, and everything seemed to be working out, and we had a pretty good school going. Well, after I was there for about 3 weeks, I always loved the looks of the P-38 whenever I saw it fly over Long Beach, where I was, and so on, as an enlisted man when I was in doing guard duty after the war started. Because the Japanese, had come in and fired at, I guess, oil tanks and so on up around Santa Barbara. So they were doing patrol duty all around the Long Beach, Los Angeles area. It happened to be the same outfit I was going to become a part of, because those fellows were all former flying sergeants, with the exception of a few of their officers in the P-38 to begin with. And I might mention one thing. They made the first group, the 82nd Fighter Group, a P-38 group, and with 3 squadrons, 95th, 96th, and 97th fighter squadrons. Because P-38 didn't have a very good name at the beginning. In fact, it was considered kind of a coffin type airplane. A lot of people had gotten killed because it had twin engines.
This might be a good time. Let's hone in on that P-38 there, and you can kind of describe it a little bit.
Well, while you're honing in, I have to. Frank, you said you were worried about your memory. It's fantastic.
I can't believe I'm remembering all these things.
It's wonderful. Dave, I got to run. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we'll talk to you. Yeah, I knew we wouldn't have a problem with that. Okay, let's take a look. I'm kind of getting a little. Maybe you can kind of, if you want to, take the.
I hope I'm not skipping around too much.
No, this is fine. No, that's good. Maybe you can point out some of that P-38 there, some of the interesting characteristics about that plane, and a little bit what you were starting to talk about.
Well, this particular picture, this painting, was made by a young gentleman by the name of Peter Saltzman, and he wanted to become a military artist. And like Stan Stokes and so forth. Well, we sat down and I drew out a sketch of the mission that I remembered the most of, and this was it. And he did such a good job, not so much the ground part, which is where the landing was taking place against Sicily with Patton and
was that Anzio?
No, I think Anzio was up in Italy.
Yeah.
But this was the Sicily invasion and so forth. And anyway, but I should tell you a little bit about this this whole mission when we start talking about it.
We'll do that. We'll come back to that when we get to that point. Let's just talk about the plane for now.
This is actually a picture supposedly of my airplane.
Oh.
And it holds one pilot, has twin booms, a horizontal stabilizer, and all the guns are in the nose, 4 50mm guns, and
50
And
caliber or 50?
50 caliber,
50,
I mean.
yeah.
And 20 millimeter cannon.
Oh, okay.
And these insignias were put there by my armament people, which are bombing missions here. And up here was, which we did up into Italy and Sardinia and so on, and the island of Pantelleria before they gave up over there when we were going to make an invasion. And these are victory
okay.
swastikas,
Yes.
with one Italian insignia. And the airplane, here are the superchargers back here. The airplane, I found, even though it was had a very large wingspan compared to what most fighters have, it had 52 feet wingspan, and most fighters are down around 30 feet to maybe 32 or so. It could outturn any airplane I found that I ever ran into, Focke-Wulfs, ME-109s, Mach-E 202s, Reggiani 2001s, you name it, if they'd ever stay in turn with you, because it has counter-rotating props, and as a result there is no torque as long as both engines were working. And so if you could get somebody to stay down there and turn with you, we'd put down what we call combat flaps, which is maybe about 15 or so degrees or whatever it was, which would increase our turning radius, and then you could just hang it on those engines, and you could just come right around and anybody was foolish enough to stay with you. So the pilots who, as I say, I think anybody that flew the airplane that had confidence in it, and they, as it went on after being first introduced, the pilots all loved it.
Why did it have a poor reputation initially?
Well, because it killed a lot of pilots to begin with, because when they first started, they even had both props going the same way.
Oh.
And they finally decided that if they reversed one of them, well, then they could get rid of that torque. Mm-hmm. And so what would happen, and when I was instructing later in P-38s, we lost a number of students when they'd lose an engine over at Van Nuys, because when one engine went out, they'd pour the coal to the good engine, and they wouldn't put in their trim like they had to do, and it would turn the airplane right over upside down. They go right in upside down and be killed. And so a lot of people were afraid of it. Now, Tony LeVere came over to England and demonstrated to the P-38 squadrons that were over there what could be done, and he would feather up both engines to give you an idea, and coming straight down at the operations shack, you could hear him because it would scream. The P-38 had a unique sound to it, and used to, I think, scare the devil out of the Germans and Italians when we'd come after them, because that's what they said anyway. But he would come down with both engines feathered, turn into, maybe start one engine up, turn into the good engine, turn into the bad engine, do all the things you weren't supposed to do with twin-engine airplanes, and showed them that the airplane, when it's properly flown, was a safe, wonderful airplane. And so when he landed, why, he was a famous person in everybody's mind that saw him fly, because they'd never seen anything like that before. And in fact, Bob Hoover does a lot of those type of things when he flies one. But the airplane was a tremendous airplane, particularly below 12,000 feet. And I felt very fortunate because all my missions were normally at 12,000 feet or below, usually right on the deck, right on the water.
Did it have a good gun platform, and that cannon, did how did that react when you fired that off compared to your 50s?
Well, that was one of the wonderful things about the P-38. The Germans and other enemy airplanes, the Italians and so on, when they were still in the war, never liked to make a head-on pass against P-38, because a P-38 with 450 caliber machine guns and a 20 millimeter cannon coming out like a pipe, you might say, when they run into that, it would just tear them apart. and they didn't want any part of that if they could avoid it, because their guns were out on their wings and would converge a certain distance out. And they just didn't like the idea of coming up against a P-38 with all that firepower we had, because if we had
I guess you wouldn't really. Did you have any convergence at all, or they just went straight out?
Straight out.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to worry about the convergent point. You know, you get so close so that all your guns would hit something, like the British Spitfires and Typhoons and those sort of things, and our other aircraft, P-40s, P-39s, because everything was coming right out of the nose. The P-39 did have a cannon that came up and went through the drive shaft, which came from the back of him, through his legs and up into the prop.
Yeah.
And so, and they had a cannon, but they didn't have everything that they had in the airplane like we had.
Yeah. They used those P-39s, I think, for tanks, going for tanks and stuff quite a bit, didn't they?
Well, I flew them for about 3.5 months. 3 months at Del Mabry Field and 70 hours, and then over in England, I think I probably put on another 12 or 15 hours.
Yeah. Now,
plus a few more down in Africa.
Did you fly missions in Africa on the P-39, or just okay?
No.
And the bailout, what were the techniques for bailing out of the P-38?
A lot of people were afraid of the P-38 because of that horizontal tail, because when you get into a dive from altitude, the airplane could have a control reversal. And instead of, when you pull back on the wheel, and it had a wheel rather than a joystick like most fighters, when you pull back on the wheel, when you've gone through this compressibility problem that the P-38 had because of the way it was made, where the air actually would come off the front of the airplane and go over and under the tail, and you no longer had control of the airplane. And we lost a number of people, test pilots and other people, who were at altitude and dove for the ground and entered this compressibility area, and found that they couldn't bring the airplane out. And those that didn't bail out were all killed. The problem was, with that horizontal tail, if you go out, you could hit it. And a number of people did hit it. In fact, I even had a tank of mine that was supposed to drop away, actually go up in between these booms and hit my tail right here, putting a big moon in it, and I thought that I'd knock my own tail off. And that's a story in itself.
Yeah.
But what you did, as long as you had control, if you had to bail out, you got shot up or something, or on fire or whatever, excuse me, you could take and pull the airplane up to like 165 miles an hour and open the canopy and slide off the wing, and you'd go under the tail. And also you could, they had a technique where you would come up and turn upside down, and when you were upside down at about 180 miles an hour or so, you could drop out by releasing your harness and so forth, parachute harness. But it was always a little bit of questionable what the problem would be, but people got where they didn't worry too much about that.
Yeah. Okay, well, good. Well, let's continue on then with. So where did you end up being stationed over there then in North Africa?
Okay, after flying P-39s at the school for about 3 weeks, I had always wanted to fly a P-38, so I requested transfer into P-38s from P-39s. And because they needed P-38 pilots up at the front, with the 82nd Fighter Group up there, the 1st Fighter Group, and the 14th Fighter Group, we had 3 groups in North Africa, why they let me transfer over. So you just about check yourself out, because there's not much anybody can do other than show you maybe how to start an engine and this, and maybe work the flaps a little bit. Then you have to go up and do it yourself. Well, so I never had any twin engine training and so on, like a lot of the fellows had who went through Willie and so forth down near Phoenix. But they let me transfer in, and I got 28 hours, and a month later I was in combat. So I was lucky to even know where to sit. But and the problem, one of the problems I had is that I found that after I had about 10 hours, 12 hours, that I needed to find out how the airplane reacted if you lost an engine. So I feathered up with the engine, and I lost something like 6,500 feet getting it straightened out. And so I knew I was in for a little of a training problem here. And fortunately, I was smart enough to get up around 10,000 feet to do this. The second time I tried it, I only lost 3,500 feet because I started doing my sequences better. And it just so happened, which I might mention after a little bit, is the third time I tried it was when I had an engine shot out, and I was 50 feet off the water up between Sardinia and Africa. And I figured, boy, I better do this one right, because I only got 50 feet to work with, and which I guess I only had about 30 feet by the time I got done. But I found the airplane would fly beautifully on single engine, and so it brought me home, and I came home and crash landed. And
being at a lower altitude, did it react better then?
Well, I found the airplane reacted beautifully under 10,000, 12,000 feet. And so I was used to that. And on all of the missions that I flew, as a rule, we were always down at 50 feet anyway, after the bombers had made their pass, whatever they were going to do, and we were protecting them. And then they'd hit the deck and get back down the water, and we go down there with them. So, and I must say that a little out of sequence here in the discussion is that, to my knowledge, even though we were outnumbered anywhere from 2 to 10 times our own number, because we would have maybe 16, 14, 12, 20 P-38s protecting a box of bombers going somewhere, and they were all ready for us because they could see us on their radar, and they knew we were coming. And when we get up to where we were with the bombers starting their bombing runs up in Sardinia and Sicily and Italy, we'd get hit with 30 to 100 fighters, and all we could do was stay with the bombers and fight them off to protect the bombers. What I was going to say is, to my knowledge, we never lost a bomber from enemy fighters, but we lost quite a number of P-38s protecting them. But I think the bomber pilots were always very happy about that they were being protected.
I'm sure that. I'm just wondering, had you been married, or did you have a girlfriend back home, or anything like this when you went over?
No. In fact, I had so little money when I was back home. I didn't have enough money, even when I was in the military, until I finally became a flyer myself, to have enough to even take a girl out and give her a sandwich.
So now, where are you? Where's your base now?
Okay.
Where you first?
What happened is they assigned 9 of us flight officers from Barshid, where we were flying P-38s, to the combat outfit of the 82nd Fighter Group, who was up in Meduina. And then they went to Bertow, I believe it was, Constantine, and so on, and on up into, finally getting up into Tunisia.
And this was what time of the year then?
Well, this was all in 1943.
Okay.
Because we were put on this military convoy going to Africa, I think somewhere around January of '43. And then when we got to Africa, we started this fighter training unit when they finally got around to giving us an assignment. And so my first my assignment to the 82nd Fighter Group, which was a battle-hardened organization, as I said, it was the same group that was doing this flying over Long Beach before when I was in the ground forces, made up primarily of flying sergeants who had been all commissioned before they got on the Queen Mary to go to England, because they went over about 5 months before we did. And because I had to go through school and so forth before I could get to the point that we were able to go and become a flyer, a fighter pilot. But it was the same organization, which was really interesting. but they assigned 9 of us flight officers back from Barshi to them, and 3 of us went into the 96th Fighter Squadron where I went, and the other 6 went into the other 2 squadrons. Interesting, humorous thing that happened to me when I was back at the Fighter Replacement Center at Barshi, near Casablanca. The fellows that were flying there at Barshi were naturally all very jealous of their own airplanes. If you were a P-39 pilot, you wanted to only have other P-39 pilots fly it, nobody else, you know, because everybody liked to fly different airplanes. Yeah. The P-40 pilots that we had only wanted people to fly their P-40s and the P-38s theirs. Well, one day I was wandering around the airfield and I got on the other side and there was one of these ground maintenance outfits. And they had a P-40 that had come off the Ranger that had been bellied in, and the props had all been bent back. And that was about all that was really wrong with it. Well, they had somehow gotten those props back straight, I think just by pulling them out, maybe having a truck down there with a chain, and then, you know, doing something like this. Well, anyway, they needed somebody to give this P-40 a test ride. And so when I was there, they said, hey, we got a P-40 here. It's just, you know, got the props all set. We'd like someone to take it up. And I said, well, I'll do it. They forgot to ask me if I'd ever flown one before. And I'd never been in one before. So I got a hold of their book and found out how to start the engines. I figured, well, you know, airplanes are airplanes. I think that's how most pilots look at it. So they gave it to me, and I got my chute, and I taxied out, and I took off. And I hadn't found out how to even get the gear up, so it took me about 30 minutes to figure out how to get the gear up. Because I think you had to put your cross hands or something to push a few buttons. It was simple, but anyway, I was trying to fly this airplane I'd never been in before and get it all trimmed up and so on, because there was a lot of torque in the airplane. And so on, and I got lost. I couldn't recognize anything when I got everything all kind of smoothed out. So I said, well, if I'm not careful, if I fly in one direction, I'm really going to get lost and I'll get in trouble. So why don't I just take and do ever-widening concentric circles, and maybe I'll see something I know, and then I can take it back. Well, that's what I did, and I finally spotted the water down that goes into Casablanca, so I followed the coast up and got my airfield. But I did you know, do dives and rolls and different things I needed to test it. It worked out pretty good, didn't have any real vibration. And so then I came in and landed, made a beautiful landing, so I was very proud of myself because you couldn't see anything, that big nose out there. And that's why, you know, you do your S-ing when you're on the ground. Well, anyway, I taxied the airplane up to basically where the other P-40s were that we had. And I was just getting out of the airplane, and I saw all these P-40 pilots coming out to see who was flying one of their P-40s. They didn't know anything about the fact that it had come out of this ground maintenance outfit. So I figured I better get out of there. So I got my chute and took off across the field in the wrong direction, you know, across the field away from where I wanted to go, where they came from, where our barracks were. And I didn't come in till it was dark. But I was very pleased with that P-40 flight.
So the P-38, your visibility was pretty good?
Yeah, the P-38 had good visibility, very good visibility.
I know on our flight simulators here, we have P-38s and P-51s that we use quite a lot, and I noticed that, and it's like you're the pilot and you're looking out, but the P-51, the P-38 has these bars like, and it seemed like it kind of obstructs you a little bit.
Where they put the bulletproof glass.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did that bother you any, seeing around those things, or did you
no, you got used to looking around whatever there was. You even had a mirror up on top that you could see behind you, which I never really depended on.
Yeah.
It saved my life many times.
It's like it's good to do that when you're driving on the freeway, rather than depending on that mirror. What was the weather like? Is it similar to here?
The weather, now in England, of course, we had a lot of weather around. In fact, I was going to tell you a story about that we used to watch. You remember on the Spitfire field we had. Well, I was actually trying to fly a Spitfire when I was over there, and they said, well, we'll let you fly one, but you got to fly a Miles Master first, which is kind of like a AT-6, because you got to get used to the brakes, because they have different brakes in the British aircraft. You get this kind of handle inside your stick, and when you press on a rudder, well, then you get brakes. And we just have the brakes where you can get them right there at the time at the rudders. So every time I'd go down to try and fly this Miles Master, either the weather was bad and I couldn't fly it, or it was out of commission. So I never got a chance to fly either one, because I couldn't get past that one flight in a Miles Master. But I used to watch these British students come in, and they'd be up, trying to get some flying time and all. And I guess most everybody knows how little time and experience most of them had. Some of them were in combat in 8 hours and that type of thing. Well, the weather would come in so fast that the minute that the weather would kind of come in, it would come in like in 20 minutes, it would be all socked in all over the place over there because of the weather that was in Great Britain itself.
Yeah.
And so these student pilots would be all coming in from all different directions trying to get on the ground before the weather socked in. Well, they'd be coming in and they'd have the nose pointed away from them, kind of away from the way they were going, so they could see, because it had that big nose out there, just like a P-40 had, and you couldn't see anything in front of it. So they'd come in and they'd be side-slipping, and they'd come in and they'd round out and they'd forget to straighten out, and they'd hit sideways. And if they didn't, wipe out the gear, why, they'd whip around and grasshopper all the way down the runway. Usually it was a steel mat or whatever out there, or maybe just a field. But it used to be kind of interesting watching to see what they were going to do, because they'd forget to straighten out. But anyway, that was that. All right, now to get back to what we were talking about.
I was wondering, in North Africa, the weather, I assume it was similar to that we have here in the desert here. And I know in the summertime, when it gets real hot, they have these,
yes,
what do you call them?
You're correct.
And did you...
The weather's like that.
Did you notice that?
The thing about North Africa was that when they would put these fighter groups into this big kind of a valley, you'd find a place like Bizerti or Medina or someplace where they'd put groups in, including sometimes bombers too, B-25s, B-26s, and so forth. And what would happen is, after a short time, there wouldn't be any growth or anything. It'd be all dust and dirt. So you could always pretty much tell where you were going if you were trying to get back to that place, because there'd be the whole atmosphere would be, filled with dirt and kind of sand and whatnot. But it was usually, as I remember, it was very hot, and then I always tie that into the food. I swore that I would never have, what do they call it, powdered eggs again, or Spam, which is what we ate so much of. And the water we drank was chlorinated in one of these blister bags that had maybe lemonade powder put in. And how we ever kept from getting sick, and being sick all the time, I'll never know, because it was the most terrible food you could ever imagine. And that's one of the reasons we were always so jealous of the Navy, because they not only had sheets on their bed, but they had big ice boxes and could have ice cream and milk, and we hadn't seen any of that type of thing for months.
Did you sleep in tents, or did you have a building barracks that you slept in?
Oh, we were sleeping in tents, like 6-man tents.
And it would get windy, I would assume, from time to time.
It would be windy and hot, and we used to kind of amuse ourselves. We'd take our .45 caliber, guns and so on, pistols, and we'd be shooting at what they called kangaroo rats. They were a rat, but they were kind of like a kangaroo, because they had these long legs and would kind of hop along like a kangaroo would. And we were forever trying to shoot those things where we could play. And that or play with the scorpions on the ground, which were everywhere too.
When did you know that you were about ready to go into combat, or I mean?
Well, I didn't even think about that. Maybe I could mention one thing that I thought was something that gave me some confidence, because being young, you know, here I was 20 years old now. You know, you have the attitude that nothing's going to happen to you, you know, and there's nothing that you can't beat, and that's why you're always trying to pick a fight with somebody if they'd fight with you, because you figure it was good practice and so on, and you did everything but fire your guns, and you get up there, you know, and go back and forth and get on each other's tails and spin and so on. And when I stopped to think about it now, it was pretty darn dangerous, but we thought nothing of it, you know. We thought nobody could outfly us. Well, I was up flying one day, and when I had about 14 hours, and I saw this P-38 over there by itself, so naturally I attacked him. Well, he and I went at it, and I got on his tail, and he did everything in the world to get me off. He got down on the ground and went by the hills, and, you know, if I'd have been lower or in wash, why, maybe I'd have been wiped off. He got up and he was doing hammerhead stalls, you know, coming down and spinning, and I would be right there behind him, you know, completely out of control. Anyway, we did that for about maybe an hour, and finally we both decided we'd go in. So I got on his wing, and we came in, and he broke, and I broke, and we came in and landed. And I was just getting out of the cockpit and so on, and I thought, well, you know, he's gone his way, and I'm going mine. He came over to my airplane, and he said, hi, he gave me his name, and it turned out he was one of the people in the 14th Fighter Group who had been disbanded because they had been cut to ribbons by the Germans and the Italians in the war, because every time they'd go up, why, they'd lose one of their old buddies. And, you know, the people that were in the original groups, the wives knew each other, you know, some of them had babies, and they were friends, and they were still living together back in the States. And every time they'd go up and they get in these fights with all these ME-109s and Falcos and Ju-88s and you name it, they'd lose one of their old buddies. And they finally got to the point where they couldn't even sleep at night. It was so bad. You know, you're losing so many, and they were so outnumbered wherever they went. And they finally disbanded them for a while. They finally brought them back and reformed them, and they became a normal group, you know, supporting the B-17s and the B-25s and all that sort of thing, and whatever else they assigned them, because they were a good outfit, but they really had, you know, had their morale just torn apart. Well, one of these fellows was made an instructor, and he came back to be at Barshid at our school. And so after we had our little togetherness all over the sky, you know, and he had done his best to wipe me off. He wasn't trying to kill me, he just wanted to get me off his tail that I wasn't about to get off. And anyway, he came over, and he had 3 victories, as I remember, to his credit, so he was a very experienced fellow. And he said, how much time you got? And I says, 14 hours. He said one thing to me I'll never forget. He says, I think you're going to make it. Well, anyway, when I had 28 hours, I was sent to combat, along with these other fellows, and so we started going their missions.
Can you tell us about your first mission you went on?
Yeah, the first mission I was on the 11th of April, and we had, I think it was 4 flights of P-38s out there, and we had, intelligence had found that as the Germans were coming up and being boxed into Tunisia area, why they were using Ju-52s to take their key personnel out and get them up into Sardinia and Sicily and so on, but also to bring supplies in and gas and you name it. Well, we were looking for the Ju-52s were out there, and they were out all flying right next to the water in a big box of airplanes, and usually they were protected by ME 210s and ME 109s and so on.
Okay, Ju-52 is a bomber, a twin-engine bomber, right?
It's a 3-engine transport.
Oh, okay, all right.
It looks like a Ford trimotor.
That's right, yeah.
But it's a very dependable airplane. They even used them as bombers in the Spanish War.
And the ME 210 is a twin-engine fighter.
That's right.
But it differs from yours because it had a single tail and a twin boom.
Yeah, it had twin engines, but it only had the single tail. The P-38, with the exception of one other kind of German airplane, which was much lighter and nowhere near as fast as a P-38, all of them had just a single tail. This other one did have something, it looked something like a P-38, but it was nowhere close to it, really. I never saw one. But, let's see, what was I going to tell you? What was it you asked me?
Well, I was having to describe the Ju-52s.
Oh, okay. Well, the thing about this group of Ju-52s, there were 25 of them, and they all had cannons mounted on the top of the fuselage toward the tail. And they were grouped in such a way that, boy, they put out firepower like you've never seen. You know, I mean, it was just terrible to be near them. Well, anyway, I was in, it was my third flight, as I remembered. And let's see if I've got it anywhere. It was on April 11th, right? Okay. I was with a fellow by the name of Rawson, and he was well liked by the organization. Your old buddy, and of course the pilots were all very close and so on.
So you had a wingman.
I was number 2-man.
Oh, but you had a four.
We had a four aircraft flight.
Like a finger four.
And I was on his right wing, as I remember it. Okay. It could have been the left wing, but right now, anyway, I was just stacked right in next to him, because we did some switching back and forth as we got into this fray. But he saw the Ju-52s off in the kind of haze and so forth near the water, and they were all right down on the water, and we expected to have top cover come down on us the minute we, can't get near these Ju-52s that they were escorting, because they'd seen them before out there, and they had the top cover and so on. And we expected 210s and 109s and all that sort of thing to be coming in. Anyway, he called them out, and as I remembered, he called out the wrong clock number. Instead of having them at 9 o'clock, I think he called them at 3, but I'm not sure anymore. I was so intent on, staying with him. And the other 3 flights, so I think there were 4 flights in this particular time, were flying on a captain who his radio was out, nobody knew it. And so when he called out the transports that we were all looking for, and it had been out there patrolling looking for them, we were getting low on fuel. Well, he had decided to take the squadron home. So he turned about that time, so everybody figured he was getting all ready to get in a position to help, And when they found out that he wasn't coming back, why, they came back to help. By this time it was all over. Well, what happened is we tore into these Ju-52s, and the other element that was with us must have gotten quite a ways back and kind of away from it. Well, Rawson and I went tearing into him, firing like everything, and he set one on fire, and I was shooting up 1 or 2 of them as I went, and I was about ready to run into it, but we didn't want to lose our speed because we had to have speed to fight, the top cover if they came in. So we go through this hail of shells and bullets, and troops were firing out of the side too. You could see all these, you know, little bits of smoke and flashes coming from almost everywhere. And they were just filling the sky with steel. Well, we came in and turned and went out and turned and came around and came in again. And about this time, my leader took and dropped behind. He must have pulled his power back because we were barreling through, and we were almost hitting him when we came by him. Well, he pulled back and he was throwing coolant. I thought he was throwing smoke, so he had been hit. And so by this time I was back into him, so there's nothing I could do but continue. So I went in, and I really think I got probably, I know I got one, and that I had gone through about 3 times. I think I probably gotten a couple more, but I knew I had the one, so I went through and came around, and I thought I'd find him, I'd pick him up when I came back. Well, I never did see him again. And they said that he didn't know how to swim, and so it may possibly have kind of frozen him up, I don't know. Or he might have been hit worse than just the one engine. Because when I came around and came through again, my right engine was hit and was throwing coolant all over the place. So I feathered it up, and I had a cannon shell come through my tank and come up and go off right near my left elbow, but it was outside my canopy, so it didn't hurt me. And I made a ring out of the shrapnel later from that. But my right aileron had been cut and jammed in the up position, so that, but it helped me keep my right side up, my right wing up. Anyway, the airplane was full of holes and so on, and so I started back toward Africa, where I thought Africa should be. And it was my 3rd mission, and I'd never been out in that area really before. I wasn't too sure quite where it was, but I took a heading, as I remembered, of about 210 degrees, something like that.
How far off the coast were you?
We were about, I think about 20 miles off the coast of Sardinia at this time. And they had German squadrons and Italian squadrons all up through those areas, so they had lots of fighters, you know. But, and I might say quite a number of aces too on their side, you know, because they'd been in the war a long time. Anyway, I got back down the water, right smack on it, because we were there anyway. And I started back, and I was on one engine, and the tail end Charlie of my flight picked me up, and he had 2 engines going, so he sat on my wing and let me lead. Well, as I was going back toward Africa, and what I thought was Tunisia, why, the rest of the squadron finally saw us and started S-ing above us to kind of protect us. So they let me lead, and I led them right into the Bay of Bizerti, which had a German Me-109 outfit on it with the airplanes flying all over. And of course we were in the haze and all. And when the rest of the squadron saw where I was taking them, because that was right into where they were, why, they all peeled off and went off into the haze, because they were going to come back around Africa and come over into, because we were, you know, we were based inland and so on, probably 100 miles away or some darn thing, whatever it was. And so when my wingman saw them go, he went too. And when I saw him go, I decided I better get out of there, so I did. And so I followed him around, and I was on single engine all by myself. Well, fortunately, the P-38 was the kind of airplane that could actually climb pretty well on one engine. And so by this time, it's starting to get kind of darkish, you know, a little bit dark. Well, I had a pretty good idea where the field was, so I went on in. Everybody had landed, and so I called in, and as I remember it, there wasn't anybody on duty on the Jeep that had the radio, but you use those coffee grinders anyway, and half the time they wouldn't work, you know. But anyway, I put my gear down, put my flaps down, and I got all ready to land. And once you put your gear down and your flaps, you ain't going around because there's not enough power there. You're just going to have to go down. And so I was getting all ready to come in, and two P-40s from our base, I think these guys had probably had some problems where they were based, so they were given this night fighter duty at the P-38 base, and they probably didn't even look to whether they know where he was coming in. You know, everybody had already come in and shut down. They just taxied out right in front of me and started to take off. Well, there's nothing I could do but try and go around, and the airplane wasn't about to. I pulled up my gear and started bringing up my flap. The airplane settled right down, and I tore off my going engine on the left side, left it in the ground. I went tearing off the end, and I missed this maintenance tent out there, and ended up in a great big pool of water, but I was okay. And I had a borrowed airplane, and it belonged to one of the guys that had probably 25 missions already and had gone back to Ifrane in the center of Algiers, which was a rest camp. They had a hotel back there where you could get some good food and all that sort of thing, get some sleep and kind of enjoy yourself a little bit. And so he was back at rest camp, and we were the new replacement, so I was using his airplane. Well, he had an old E with a skunk painted on it. And when I got out of the cockpit after I stopped, why, I went running off the end, going to get off the wing, and I saw all this water. And at least I was smart enough to stop and go back and go off the other one and get on dry land. About this time, why, here come our guys in the Jeeps and so forth, and I could see them coming. And I thought they were coming out because they were concerned about me. Much to my surprise, they went right by, went to the airplane, started taking off things like the canopy and the clock and some of these valves they need to get the gear up that they might not have in there for their own airplane, because they wanted to take care of their pilot, you know, and their plane, and just ignored me. Well, I thought, boy, when I see the crew chief of this particular airplane that I've just smashed all to pieces, it's all full of holes anyway, he's going to be mad at me, because crew chiefs are, you know, very, very so about their airplane. Well, much to my surprise, he came up and he shook my hand. He says, "Now I'm going to get a new airplane." So anyway, that was that one.
Oh gosh, that was it. So your wingman, no sign of him or anything?
No, he was the leader.
I mean the leader, yeah.
Yeah. No, he never showed up, and the whole squadron morale was at, you know, rock bottom. So the group commander took and had a P-38 flight up to Algiers, get the belly tanks that he carried full of beer. And then he went up to altitude, got it all cold, and came back, and everybody had a party. That's the only way you get the morale back up like it should be. But that was a sad time for us.
But that high cover never bothered you then? They never came down?
Well, they didn't have any high cover.
Well,
they were by themselves.
Well, they were.
And it must be because they had all these cannons on all of these airplanes and could put up so much firepower. Because when I tell you, when I was flying through it just from my own airplane, it was just covered with, you know, I had holes everywhere. I was lucky I didn't lose the other engine too.
So what was your next kind of memorable mission that you were on?
Well, let's see, I've got a couple of things here that I might kind of refer to.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, it's May 20th, let's see, I ran into some FW-190s and a 109 and 109s, and I got an FW-190 and a 109 on that mission.
Were you flying cover for the bombers on that one, or what?
Yeah. In fact, like I told you, there were so many enemy airplanes always waiting for us where we got up there as a rule, because we were up in their area, you know, way out, because we were the so-called strategic air force. We were covering the bombers, and the bombers, the procedure for the bombers was to take, and then maybe have I don't know, 20 to 25 of them as a box, and they'd go on up and they'd go stay below the radar right on the deck, and we get off to the side and throttle way back, so we'd all be at the same level. And then when they'd get up to where they could see the enemy shore, you know, coming up in the clouds and all, why they'd take and give it the power and start climbing up their bombing altitude, and we give it the power and start S-ing to protect them. And there usually we'd have somewhere between 16 and 24 of us. Well, when we get there, we get hit with maybe 30 to 100 enemy fighters. At their leisure, they'd be coming down doing all they wanted to. So it's a miracle, I think, that we didn't lose any bombers. But of course, they did have to go through the flak, and usually we'd let them go through the flak, because if it was a coastal target they were after, or a marshalling yard or a railroad or whatever situation, and we just protect them. They'd go into the flak. You could see the flak would be so thick you couldn't even see them, and they'd drop their bombs, turn around, come back. We'd pick them up, and then if any enemy fighters came in, why, naturally we were there to take them on. We'd wait till they get back down on the deck, and then when they got far enough out, they didn't think the fighters could get them. They'd throttle back and, you know, save their fuel so that they could get home back in Africa.
When they had damaged bombers coming out of that flak that would fall back, then you'd have to protect them as best you could?
Well, if there was anybody, we always covered them and so forth. And if there was any ME-109s, went after them when they had their the flak, you know, and they were into the flak after the target. We thought they were pretty much crazy, because they were taking as much chance of getting shot down, and the B-25s had pretty good defenses anyway with their guns. But in fact, whenever we'd have trouble and we'd have to leave our squadron and come back by ourselves, why we'd try and find a B-25 or a B-17 out there, and then we'd slowly work our way under them and let them protect us. And so that happened, like, I don't know, at least once with me, as I remember. I came back and was watching the gunners, hoping they wouldn't shoot me out of the sky.
Had you done much hunting when you were a kid? I mean, were you good at shooting, sighting things?
In Salt Lake, I used to go up in the hills with a 22 that I had. In fact, I had two 22s, and I'd shoot and so forth. And I'd ski up there too when I could, you know, with these old-fashioned skis with rubber bands that got in the snow. And your feet would turn completely where you couldn't feel anything, you know, because all the blood was gone.
Did flying come naturally to you pretty much?
Yeah, I never had any trouble flying. I had a little trouble landing an AT-6 when I first started, and they were looking for people to wash out. And so I was afraid that my instructor, who I think was a brand new second lieutenant who just had become an instructor and wanted to be a fighter pilot and didn't like the idea of instructing, he kind of had a chip on his shoulder. So he was looking for people to wash out, because I think they had a quota to meet. Like they used to take and wash out about somewhere around, I don't know, 40 to 60% of the class. You know, they'd find some reason to get rid of them. And I think he was looking for somebody. He probably had a quota. So I was supposed to come in and make 3-point landings. And for some reason, I'd get the airplane down, it would be just about right, and I'd get the front gear on the ground. I couldn't get my tail down. So he said, well, come on back Monday. I think this was on Friday that I had my so-called checkout with him. And so the instructors were all working hard over the weekend to get everybody checked out as they could. So I did a lot of thinking about it, and I talked to the other people, and I finally figured out the way to take care of my problem. And that was when I was on final. I'd take and roll my trim all the way back, so I had to shove the stick forward. And then when I started to break my glide and so forth, the airplane felt fine. And I could, you know, feel it down to the ground. So I used that technique, and I came down there on I think a Sunday, and there was an instructor that was there ready to check people out, you know, because they wanted to get the class going. And so he took me up, and I made 3 beautiful landings, so I was all qualified. So my assigned instructor came back, and he was looking for me so he could wash me out. I was already cleared and gone, and so I didn't have to worry about him anymore, because I found out what to do.
Yeah. Okay, so back to this the mission that you were talking about, where you were covering the B-25s.
Well, just about all my missions where we weren't on search and destroy missions, where we were out looking for trouble, which we didn't get many of, but we always loved that because we didn't have to worry about the bombers, which we always stayed with them to protect them. I want to give you a little idea, though, what happened on this one mission when I got this FW-190 and 190. There were so many airplanes after us and coming down all the time, you know, and they're always trying to get you away from the other guys so they could box you in, and about 9 or 10 of them would jump on you and get rid of you, and then they go get somebody else, you know, and they just slowly whittle our forces down. Well, I had so many people trying to get at me, and I was usually flying tail end Charlie at that time, being new. Why, it seemed like they were always after me, and I had a technique to escape from them, which I found was a lifesaver throughout my whole career. And that is, when I had somebody coming up my tail, I used to go into a hard bank, and usually to the left, and stand on the left rudder and cross control the controls, and the airplane would start slipping as I turned, and always used to make them think I was going in one direction and they'd be shooting in the wrong place, and that way I'd, you know, get away from them, and then I could go after them. And I was banking and, you know, and trying to get away from so many of them that were after me. On this particular mission, I burned up 4 of my guns. So when I came in, why, I only had my 12mm that was still going. It was kind of interesting.
You mean you used all the ammunition, or by burning up?
No, I just was firing so much, my guns overheated, and they just melted.
Oh.
On this mission, actually it was the next mission on the 24th, it was when I had my 4 guns burn out, and I had a damage occur that I got credit for, but I didn't get an airplane. But the briefing had been that the bombers had the option when they got up there, when they went after their target, they could decide, the squadron commander of the bombers could decide if he wanted to go across Sardinia and drop more bombs, because they saved some of them, on a seaport and so forth over there, and we would continue with them and protect them while they were over, you know, doing this. Or they could come out and head for the deck to come home, and we'd protect them there. Well, I was breaking so often back and forth and trying to fight off, you know, one fight after another, that all of a sudden the sky was clear. I turned back and everybody was gone. And nobody, you know, used the radio. Nobody would, we had radio silence. And so what had happened is that they had decided to go across the island and bomb this other target. And they did that, and I was all by myself. And here, you know, I had all this fighting going on, and this, that, and the other. Anyway, I headed for the deck and started back toward Africa. And an ME-109 up there about 10,000 feet saw me down there and figured he had an easy kill. So here he comes, and he was by himself. So I was watching him, and he came down, and I was right on the deck. So I said, well, here we go. So I gave her full power and turned around, banked into him, which we always did. We always turned into him, hoping for a head-on pass. Well, he came down, and we were aimed at each other, and we both decided to try and get altitude over the other one. So we both went up, and we both of us stalled out at about somewhere around 8,000 to 10,000 feet, and we were dead zero airspeed. Well, I only had one gun left, was working, and my cannon I hadn't used it for this particular fight because I waited till I got on somebody I could be sure I was going to use it right, because you don't have that many shells in it. Anyway, we both fell toward each other, and he was firing at me. We were only about 100 yards apart, and I was firing at him, except I only had one gun. We both fell back to the deck, neither one hitting the other one. And when we got down there, we had our flying speed back. He turned around and tore off toward Sardinia, and I tore off toward Africa, and we were both very happy. But that was my number 3 mission.
The previous one, you said you got 2 fighters on that previous one?
Yeah, well, let's see. I got a Ju-52 on my first one. Right. I got 2 fighters on my second one.
On that second one, do you remember the circumstances, how you got those
I have to take that back. I got the FW-190 and I got a 109 damaged.
Okay.
Okay. And we were supposed to have gun cameras so we could confirm everything we did, but they didn't have them over there. And those that they did have, the vibration was so bad when you were firing your guns that you couldn't see anything anyway, really. So you had to have somebody that was in your outfit verify if you were going to get any credit for anything. And so on the Ju-52 mission, we had the Lieutenant Perron, who was the element leader, and an old sergeant pilot, and now a first lieutenant. I think he was a sergeant pilot. I'm not sure, because he was a first lieutenant. Well, that's all right. Okay, they were, because they gave them a promotion. They didn't give the sergeant pilot flight officers anything, but they had an automatic procedure, and so he was a first lieutenant. And so he confirmed my Ju-52, which is very obvious because I was just shot to pieces. And we lost the flight commander. And everybody had some damage. On this next mission, I got this FW-190, one of the old heads, former sergeant pilot, now a second lieutenant, confirmed it, because he saw the whole thing and the airplane go in and crash. And
how, do you remember the circumstances of how you got this one?
I'll tell you, they were coming in at us so often, and we were breaking into them, that what you were trying to do is get them where they were trying maybe to get somebody else, and then you'd get them, and so forth. And as I remember, that's what happened, but he caught on fire and went on down. Yeah. And the damaged, I've even forgotten quite how that happened.
When you have that, it's just planes going all over the place, and you get when you say you just get off a couple of bursts, and then you're on to something else.
And you can't afford to stay there and be with one very long, because there'd be so many coming in on you, because they were up there just coming down at us all the time. I used to think they were going to run into each other. There were so many of them.
Yeah. Were you ever able to actually get on one's tail and be able to?
Oh yeah.
Pump it into.
Oh yeah.
We can talk about that later.
But then on the 18th of June, I got an ME-109, and then I got a Reggiani 2001. That was my only Italian airplane.
What was it? What was it? What did it look like?
It's a small Italian fighter that's it isn't awfully big, but it was a good fighter.
It's kind of like a Fiat.
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. As I remember, it had an inline engine and carried one pilot, and the Italians were great for doing acrobatics. Every time they'd see us, they'd start doing acrobatics. They'd start doing loops and elements and rolls, and we thought that was really pretty. And we'd watch them, and as soon as they finished, we'd shoot them down. Because we couldn't afford to be out there doing that kind of thing. We had bombers to protect, but we were always trying to protect each other's tails as best we could, this way too. And the top ace of North Africa when I was flying was First Lieutenant Dixie Sloan, a former sergeant pilot, and he confirmed both of these particular airplanes. He had 12 victories to his credit, and I had 9. But anyway, I used to fly with him quite a bit. And then when I got the most airplanes I ever got, I got 3 FW-190s and a damaged 190 on the invasion of Sicily. And this is where we came up from Tripoli. We had put us in Tripoli to await the invasion of Sicily, and then we were supposed to go up and either going to protect the convoys or protect the landings. And we were up there, and we were around 8,000 feet, as I remember.
Is that what the painting is about? Is this painting depicting that?
Yes.
Okay, well
And that's what this painting is
okay,
about.
let's go into that.
And they did what happened in combat there was the first time I'd ever seen it. And I didn't think it would happen in World War II, and because they did it all the time in World War I, and that's where they did I got a momentary lapse. Anyway, everybody got in trail, and and you went around and you know, and one on everybody's tail.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Maybe you can remember what that.
I forget what they call that, but I know what you're talking about.
I'll think about it.
Line astern or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. But I'd never seen them where they'd all get together and stay with each other, and you'd like on this like here. Like you have a P-38, and he'd be on an FW-190's tail, and you'd have a wingman, and there'd be a FW-190 or another enemy aircraft on his tail, and behind him another P-38, and we were going around the sky in like that, going up and down, but in this line, and that's what this shows. It's 2 P-38s, and I had just shot down this guy. He was bailing out. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, I can.
And behind him comes another FW-190 with 2 P-38s after him. And so that was quite a fight. I think we got something close to 20 airplanes that day. And I got what happened is that these Focals, we watched them come up from their field, and they came up to fight with us because they saw us up there. And so when they came in, this one Focal was banking up in front of me. He was after another P-38, and I was inside of him, so I gave him a couple of quick bursts, as I remember, and he just winged on over and went on in. And then we were still going around doing this in-line maneuver and so forth, when another one came up, and he was banking, and I was able to get on top of him. It was so close I didn't even have to use my gun sight. And he caught on fire and went on down. And of course this was all being seen by the squadron, so those were the confirming, because the squadron commander used to have what they call a claim report, and so after the intelligence people had debriefed you, why he had to examine everything and decide, you know, from an investigation that he would make, a preliminary, whether it was something that was correct or not, and so on. So that's why if you had specific people see it, and they could see it, why that naturally could confirm what you had. And then that all took place in something like I don't know, 10 minutes or 5, maybe less than that. I've forgotten, but it wasn't very long. And then I found a P-38 after another FW. It was right down on the water, going in, and the enemy airplane was leaving the P-38 way behind, so he was out of range and everything. And I had all my speed, so I just cut down and just went down and gave him a quick burst and so forth, and he did a loop right into the water. And the other guy that I got, the damage, he was just one that was going like crazy, and I just gave him some shots, and it didn't seem to affect him at all if I even hit him. And so that's the way that one worked out.
Probably chances are the one that winged over and went into the water, the pilot was probably killed, you think, probably?
Oh, as far as I could tell, I didn't see anybody bail out.
But did that ever bother you?
No. No, they were trying to kill us all the time.
Right.
And they didn't really care how they did it.
Yeah.
But, and of course that was the one wonderful thing about the war, as far as America was going. We felt we were in the right,
you know, of course, they were trying to take London and Great Britain, and you know, and do all those things, and they were killing the Jews. And
Had you known anything about what they were doing?
Mistreating prisoners of war.
Did you know anything about what they were doing to the Jews and POWs and things like that?
Well,
before the war?
we kind of had an idea because we kept getting reports of, you know, what was happening, and they were so obnoxious and so on. The prisoners in Tunisia, when they were being taken prisoners, they'd be on their prisoner rail cars, and they'd be making jokes, and you know, at us, and we were their victors. You know, they were our prisoners, and you know, and they were just so obnoxious.
Like we're going to win. You know, you're just wasting your time with
and
this.
Of course,
or
we
whatever.
were also new at war. That all we were trying to do was stay alive and do our jobs, you know, and do things as honorably as we could, you know, like you never shot at anybody and you shoot and all that type of thing. And it seemed like I think their main fighter pilots who had been, you know, who were really in like JAG 77 and all that type of thing. Which we ran into and had a fight with and so on. I think these were all honorable, worthwhile, wonderful pilots, but then you would hear about some of the things that, you know, did happen, and so, like they had a captured P-38, and it would get up and fly and act like it was one of ours, and kept come up, and we lost some bombers because of it. And so we got where we couldn't even trust a P-38 we didn't know. It could be a German, you know, they had one of our airplanes. Somebody had landed with gear down too, you know, terrible, and they got a good airplane. So we were looking for him.
Their two best fighters, not counting the jets, were the ME 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190.
That's right.
Did they have pretty much the same characteristics, those planes? Did they have the same, more or less the same characteristics?
Well, the Focke-Wulf was supposedly, 190 was supposedly a better airplane and a little faster and just a better airplane. Strangely enough, their top ace, who was it, Hartmann, who fought on the Russian front, had 365 kills or something. He flew the same type ME 109, I think, throughout his entire career, so he liked his airplane real well. Of course, a lot of his victories, you know, were with countries in the lowlands, like, you know, Stearman type airplanes and other trainers, but also I suppose they were full-fledged fighters, and so he was obviously an extremely fine fighter pilot. But we ran into the what they call Goring's yellow noses and had fights with them and so on. And they left Africa and then they came back reformed and so forth. And they were dubbed the yo-yo boys because they would come, you know, they'd come down like this and picking on whatever they were getting. They called them yo-yo boys. But they all had their spinners painted yellow. And every man in the outfit was an ace. So you're flying against top flight pilots. But it was kind of interesting.
The whole time that you were flying out of Africa, North Africa, were the Germans still have a foothold in there, or were the Germans still have bases in North Africa when you were there, or had it been secured yet by the Allies?
Oh yeah, no, they were there. In fact, after the war was supposedly over in Africa, when the Germans had given up, and we had boxed them in Tunisia and taken them prisoner, we were given permission to visit, you know, fly around and maybe go into a enemy field and see what we thought of it. And so 2 or 3 of us got P-38s and flew on up and went into one of the German fields that had been given a clearance as being safe. So we landed, and I got a hold of I took a swastika off an ME1 Focke-Wulf 190 with a chisel and hammer, And so I had that when I came back and first was going to join the first fighter group flying P-80s at March Field. Later on, you know, a couple of years later on or whatever, because March Field, I think, had the first P-80s in the Air Force, the first fighter outfit. And but anyway, and I also have little tags that came off of a Mach-E 200 and a Mach-E 202. You know, inside the cockpits they have little things that explain like where the radio is and this, that, or the other, like we do. And so I have some of those things, and where they push levers and do this and that to make their airplanes work. And
Yeah.
and so they had these airplane skeletons sitting in this field. So we stayed around and we took some pictures, and which I have. And while I was there, I found a German cigarette case by some of the enlisted person that was a German, who had come all the way up from Suez and Tripoli and so on with Rommel, and until apparently they had evacuated the field, and he had all this scratched on this little tin cigarette case, and he put in every place like where, you know, there was a special spot where he had been. So it was quite a memento, and I have it in the P-38 museum down at March Field, and explain where I found it and so forth. But anyway, the interesting thing is, we were cleared by our intelligence organization on our field, who, you know, brief the pilots when they've been on missions and so forth, debriefers and all the rest of it, write up all the reports, that this field was clear, because they got that from higher headquarters. When we got back, turned out it hadn't been cleared at all. We could have all been blown to pieces, including the airplane.
Let's take a pause for a second. So, yeah, let's go on maybe to your next memorable
Okay, there was one mission which was very sad for me. It was a mission up toward Italy, near the Italian boot area, that we had B-25s with 75mm cannons mounted in them.
Yeah.
And they were shooting up landing barges and so on, and we covered them as they were doing this, as we went on our mission. And we had a flight with bombs on board. I think they were 500-pounders. And I was the tail-end Charlie in this particular flight, and I was flying on Lieutenant Drayton, who had actually come into the outfit, and he was a second lieutenant with me. And he was married, his wife was going to have a baby, or did just have a baby. And he was a real nice fella, and I liked him a lot. And I was his tail-end Charlie, his wingman. And the other 4 flights that were with us, because by this time we had more P-38s and so on, were tasked to fly cover for us. At the same time, we were all flying cover in a way for the B-25 dashing around down below. And they were just shooting and having a heck of a good time down there. And they didn't know what happened. There was a bunch of Me-109s and I think some Italian aircraft that were flying over the clouds. Well, we came up from the deck, and when we started, you know, we came over a hospital ship, and we were going to hit that with bombs, and saw it was a hospital ship, pull off. And it was apparently an Italian hospital ship. And so it possibly even notified its headquarters that we had come by and we're out there. But after I read some of the stories, I think maybe it was just one of those things that they didn't. We just went by them, everything was fine, and the clouds were coming in. The weather was coming down, and everything was getting really thick, real cumulus clouds, and it was probably about, oh, I don't know, 4,000 feet thick, maybe a little thicker than that. And it was coming down to about 3,000 or 2,800 feet. Well, we needed a minimum of something like 3,000 feet to make a proper bomb run, so you get straightened out and get all, you know, and then drop your bomb and hit what we were after.
I'm going to have to.
This organization from number 2 JAG 77, which had some, I think, some German sergeant pilots in it. Anyway, they spotted these P-38s below the clouds, through the clouds, which I guess was our outfit because we were the only P-38s out there that day. And we were stretched out right up against the clouds, which were kind of open in spots, but not much, getting ready to drop our bombs. So we were as high as we get, so our top cover of 4 flights was down below us. So they weren't really covering us at all. So they were kind of watching the B-25s and trying to watch us. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, which I thought was an W-190, but I guess could have been a 109. Anyway, he came through right on top of Lieutenant Drayton and fired and went by. And of course, I dropped my bombs and my tanks and started after him. And he tore down and went up into the clouds, and I tore down and went up after him and came around, and I was shooting and everything. And there was 2 or 3 others that were coming through, and the other guys were shooting at them. So all of a sudden we had a complete, what you call, melee. And anyway, when I came out of the cloud, there was this big thing where a fighter had come down and gone straight in, and that was the one I was after. And the other guy got one of the other ones that was zooming around, and they were just going like you know, like everything. Anyway, we got some of them, and they got some of us, and we came back, and we thought Drayton would be back. He'd be back, you know, because he just kind of straightened out when this enemy airplane came through and right on top of him. And I think that the fellow that shot him down was after me, but he misjudged because of the clouds and everything and the weather. And so when he came down, he was on top of the element leader, Lieutenant Drayton, and he never got back. He was never a prisoner of war or anything, so we lost him, and I was very, very sad about it.
Now, you said you had bombs, so you were on a bombing mission yourselves with the P-38?
We were on we had 4 of us had bombs too also, and that's why our flight had the bombs, and the other 4 flights were supposed to be top cover.
What did you have, like 250 pounders or
500 pounds?
Oh, you did. You
Yeah.
could carry those, huh? One.
We could carry 1,000 pounders, and we did. And I think later when the bigger engines came out, when they had the, you know, the L models and you know, because everything I flew after that first mission where I crash landed that other pilot's airplane, I flew Fs.
And the big difference going up was better performance, engine performance?
Well, they had bigger engines. They got boost. One of the things that was so hard to do is when you were on after an ME-109 or something, his technique to get away was to turn upside down the split S, and we'd try and follow him, and we had to do it with a wheel. So you bent this wheel around, and it took a lot of power to do it. In fact, we were known as kind of crabs because we had one big, strong arm that would control the airplane, and the other one you worked the throttles and the superchargers. And as a result, why you could haul that airplane around, but you did it with one arm as a rule, and because we shot with the buttons and so forth that were on our wheel, and control everything else with our left hand, the trim and you name it, whatever was necessary to be done. And the ME-109 would get away from you, because by the time you got turned over, why, he was gone. So they finally got boost in the airplanes.
You know, what is boost? How do you
and
how would you
later
describe?
models had boost. Boy, you turn that stick over, and the airplanes have whipped over just as fast as the other guy would be.
Well, describe boost. What are you talking about there?
Well, okay, they had, you know, it's just kind of like it says, everything was boost. If, like, for instance, your ailerons, if you turn your aileron on, you've got a boost pump, and so what happens is when you move the wheel, where before it was directly to cables, which, you know, moved your ailerons, and then the airplane would react. Why, the minute you move your wheel, why, it shoves boosts out there and shoves that aileron up, and the airplane reacts, you know, immediately.
So I was thinking of boost meant that you would go faster, but it meant that you could, your trims and things would you could maneuver.
And you could do it without using all your power. You know, you could just touch the wheel, and the airplane would react, you know, like a jackrabbit, so to speak. They also had dive brakes on them. So the airplane, if you ever got in a position where you went into this compressibility factor, you could bring the airplane out of it, where we'd lost so many people and so forth from coming in from altitude that got into that problem, and just improved the airplane, because it's a beautiful airplane. So I was instructing in all those kind of airplanes later on in Van Nuys.
When you were with, like, someone for quite a long time, I suppose you developed a really close relationship. I mean, you were all like a team, I would assume, and almost like brothers. So, or did you try not to do that so much when you saw people being lost?
Actually, I tried to make no friends if I could help it. I didn't want to get to know the new people, because we'd lose them. And like, for instance, on the one mission that I was talking about, I didn't even tell you about that one.
Okay.
This is the one on September 2nd. It was, I got an ME-109 on that mission. I got my ninth victory. What happened, they were going to really make a big mission, so they got all the B-25s in North Africa they could get. And they were strung out across the sky for maybe 100 miles, I don't know how long way. And everybody was assigned a box of bombers, different squadrons and so on, and we had the last box. So we had to go up to 16,000 feet because we were the last ones and so forth. And they were coming in from Sicily and Italy and so forth in this string, and they were trying to knock out, I think, all these marshalling yards and maybe airfields and everything, I don't know. But the thing is, because I've forgotten a little bit about exactly what they were after, but all these airplanes that were coming in, and it just seemed like they were coming in for like a half an hour straight. And we were covering the last flight of bombers, and some of our other squadrons, like the 95th and the 97th, had another box and another box, but in front of us. Well, we'd gone in on the deck, and we'd gone up to altitude, 10,000 feet or so, and the bombers had gone in, and when the other bombers had gone back, and so they had, you know, done their job, and so we had the last group. Well, that's what the enemy was waiting for, because they had never seen probably that many bombers and fighters around, because they had all the P-38s they could find and so on. I think there were 70 P-38s out there. And this was, the 2nd of September. And it was known as the, I guess you might say the bloodiest fight of the war up till that time in the air. And so our bombers again were coming out, and all of a sudden we got hit with 30 bombers, and they were fighters, there were FW-190s, ME-109s, Italian airplanes, as I remember it. And they were using a different technique. Instead of dropping their tanks like all fighters are more or less told to do, when you see an enemy, you drop your tanks, push your throttle forward, your RPM forward, your mixture forward, arm your guns, you know, and go to it. And they would do basically the same thing. Well, this time they didn't drop their tanks. And of course, the one thing we had over them is the fact that we actually had quite a distance to go, but we also stayed in the air longer. Is when they'd use up their fuel, why, they had to go home and land. Well, before, they could only stay and fight for maybe 15 minutes because they would use up the fuel they had and all that and go through a fight and have to leave. Well, now they kept their tanks right up till the time they started using their guns. As soon as they started finally getting to what they were going to shoot at, they dropped their tanks. So this gave them more time. And of course their whole plan was to run us out of fuel if they could. So we got hit by like 30 fighters, and so we were protecting their bombers and getting them down on the deck, and they were trying to get to them, and we were, you know, fighting them off. And then no sooner would you get through with 30, and about 30 more would come in and hit you. And of course we were using up our ammunition and our fuel and, you know, at full power. And where we were used to fighting maybe for 15, 20 minutes max, and now we're fighting for half an hour, 40 minutes and so forth. And we were trying to get home too. And we were running out of fuel, running out of ammunition and so on. So I never saw a fight like that before in my life. There were airplanes going into the water about every 1,500 yards for about 75 miles. And it would be either an ME-109 or a P-38, and just everybody hitting that water, getting shot out of the sky, and mid-air collisions, you know, having head-ons and blowing up. And I was, you know, I was trying to get on somebody, and then somebody else come and get me, and so I'd be braking, and I had 4 ME-109s shooting at me at one time. What happened is we were down on the deck in this turn, and these 2 ME-109s came right next to me, right off my wing, you know, out there a little ways, but still much closer than they ever usually do. Came down, going real fast, and pulled on up. And so naturally, my technique and procedure was always to break into them. I always broke. Every time I ever heard the word break, boy, I never even thought about it. I just broke, because they were usually after me anyway. And I was going through my, you know, sliding, and I was a terrible pilot because I was all over the sky. I figured it's the only way to stay alive. Yeah. And so anyway, I broke into these guys, and what they were trying to do is get me sucked away from my flight, and then they were going to all pounce on me. Well, that's what happened. I got over there, and the next thing I knew, I had 2 of them coming right down on top of me, as I remember it, right above me and so on, and I was in a turn. And they were shooting, I could see everything flashing, and other 2, and they were coming in line abreast, and they were coming in from an angle, and they were shooting at me at the same time. So I had 4 of them shooting at me one at a time, and I was, you know, twisting that airplane inside out to get out of their way, you know, and the water underneath me was just churning with machine gun and cannon fire, just boiling, and they didn't hit me once. So the technique was a good one. Yeah. And this is something we wanted to teach, at least I wanted to teach the students, so they could stay alive too when they got over there. And so that's one of the things I tried to teach my flights. But we never had what I call the proper techniques that we taught. You know, you teach people to break and do this and that, but not some of the finer points to stay alive, you know. And if a person can make it through the first 8 missions, usually he can see enough. You know, he starts seeing the enemy airplanes before he doesn't even see them when they're coming in. Everybody's calling him out, and he can't see them. But if you can live, say, through 8 missions, why, you probably make it. At least that seemed to be the general philosophy. So 6-8 missions seemed to be the absolute minimum. But anyway, I got away from that, and I started back from my flight and so forth. And by this time, the way it was, when you got broken up, you picked up anybody you could. You got on their wing or they got on yours, and you tried to, you know, help each other. Well, I was by myself trying to find my flights and my people, and the other squadron was coming back to help us because we were getting hit by all these additional airplanes, and there was aerial cannons being shot off, there was rockets being shot off, there was machine guns being used, aerial bombs, you name it, and they were doing their best to get at our bombers, and they didn't get one. And every time I'd start to shoot at somebody, why, I'd look and there'd be somebody coming in on me, so I'd have to brake, and then I'd get straightened out again, and I'd get ready to shoot, and I'd have to brake, and so I just was braking all over the place, and I couldn't shoot much. But I was still running myself out of ammunition, and I was trying to work my way back home. And my gas was starting to get all used up. And this 109 came right by me and right in front of me. And he was out there a little ways, and I just, you know, let him have it, so to speak. And he flew right through my fire. And he flew on, and all of a sudden he just went into the water. And I never could figure out whether it was me that hit him or whether he had forgotten what altitude he was and used their standard technique of always breaking down to get away, and he had forgotten and just dove into the water. But he was my, you know, my airplane.
Yeah.
But it was a...
Did you lose anybody out of your group on that?
Yeah,
mission?
we lost 10. And we lost 7 from my squadron. And it really makes me feel really bad when I think about it, because almost every one of them were brand new. You know, they just didn't know what to do. But anyway, we actually lost a total of 10. I think we got something like, we lost 10 from my outfit, and I think they got a total of something like 20 altogether of our guys, and we got something like 29 of them.
That was on that one day?
Mm-hmm. And our unit got a Distinguished Unit, Presidential Unit Citation for the fight, which is kind of unusual to have, you know. And I got 2 Presidential Unit Citations for these kind of things, you know. One was a ground sweeping. But I got malaria. I was the only one in the outfit to get malaria, more than I was the only officer. And I had to go to the hospital for 2 weeks before we left Africa. And so on that mission where I lost Drayton, I was kind of yellow from Atterbury, you know, and I really wasn't up to it, but somehow it worked out. But then when I got back to the States, because I left on September 18th, because this one on September 2nd, I was telling you about this 109, the guys all went back and landed either at Sicily or, which I did, and refueled and went back to Africa, and so on.
Let's kind of recap your time in North Africa then. Were there any other missions that we didn't talk about that were memorable for you that you had?
Well,
or where you got your other?
We had some missions. What you might say they were bombing missions and strafing missions for the island of Pantelleria. And Pantelleria was a little island off the coast of Tunisia that was manned by the enemy, and they had a lot of coastal guns, and they didn't give up or anything when we took Tunisia. So we went out to soften them up, and so
These were Germans or Italians? Germans or Italians?
Well, I think they were mainly Italians, but the Germans were, you know, smart enough to get out of there, but they didn't give up. So we started going after them because they had a whole landing setup. You know, they had the Navy in there, they had landing craft, they had troops. They were going to storm them. They had an airfield on there that went right into a hill, a kind of a mountain. And some of our guys, like our group commander, skip bombed, put a 500-pound bomb, I think, right inside their hangar. I don't know if it ever went off or not, but he did. He skipped it right in there. In fact, I landed on Pantelleria after we finally took it, and they gave up. When I was coming back from a mission, and I was using somebody else's airplane, and it was a gas eater, and my fuel was going down right in front of me, and the rest of the guys were seemed to be okay, and we were right off the coast of, I think it was the coast of Sicily, as I remember it, but because you could see it off in the haze, and so on, but anyway, I finally left my flight, which you never do, and we had radio silence because we had been hitting a target further on up toward Italy and so on, as I remember it. But I had to find someplace to land, and I thought somehow this might be the Bizerti area, like before I was telling you, where the ME-109s were, and I thought maybe now it's American, we own it, and so on, so I can go in there. Well, about half the mission on the way back, and I was leaned out, and my fuel was going down. I thought I was going to go in the water. So I left everybody, and so they reported me as missing. It's gone. They saw me go, and I didn't say anything, and they didn't say anything because nobody could say anything. And I went over toward there, and they thought I had gotten a prisoner because they knew it was an enemy area. And so when I went over there, I saw these ME-109s flying up there, and here I am over there trying to get in. I said, well, I can go to the water rather than, you know, become a prisoner this way. So I turned back and leaned back, and I found the island of Bizerti out in the water, out in the haze, as I was coming back toward Africa. And so I set myself up, I dropped my gear, I dropped full flaps. I had used up almost all my fuel, so I knew that I was as light as possible. I didn't have any bombs on board or anything. And I took in and came in, I drug in like I would make a short field landing, and I landed on this little airfield they had, or the little runway that went right up into this mountain. It wasn't very awfully long. And I landed right in the end and stood on my brakes and stopped before I got to the end. And the British were there.
What island was that again?
Pantelleria. Well, before this, we were bombing the island of Pantelleria, and I got credit for 2 gun positions, because they used to shoot their coastal guns at us when we were trying to get away near the water, and they were throwing up geysers in front of us, trying to make us hit it, you know, and so they could knock the airplanes down. But we went on a number of bombing missions, and I got 1 gun position that I was after, and this other one, I had another mission that I was after a warehouse down there next to the coast, and I forgot to use my trim properly, so when I was down, I was skidding. The bomb came off, went over, hit another gun position, so I got credit for 2 gun positions. But in fact, that's one of the things you see here. And then we bombed some ships, and so on, and so on. So I guess I had 4 missions where I'd hit something. 4 of them were German, and so on. But
so how many missions did you fly in North Africa altogether then?
I had credit for 50 missions. Yeah.
And your outfit, how many planes did your unit get credit for? And
we had the top scoring P-38 outfit in the European theater. The only outfit that had, I think, 2 airplanes, or maybe 1 more than we did, was the 475th, which was a P-38 outfit that Bong flew with, and Lindbergh flew with, and McGuire flew with, out in the South Pacific.
Yeah.
Did you ever know Pete Myers by any chance?
I don't think so.
Pete was a wonderful guy. He's gone now. Anyway, he was there. He was their public relations man, and we were together all the time. But every time that it seemed like we'd get 1 or 2 or 3 airplanes, they'd get 4. And they kept one ahead of us, so they're the only outfit that were ahead of us in the entire world.
Yeah.
Because our P-38s were in every theater and did everything a fighter could do. In fact, the P-38 museum down at March Field is a hangar that's dedicated to Tony LeVere, who, you know, did all this testing and blew up 14 engines, checking engines out, trying to get, you know, things straightened away there by the people that made them, and was a tremendous fellow and a tremendous pilot and a good friend of mine. But
Did you know any of the guys that shot down Yamamoto, those P-38 pilots?
Rex Barber,
Yeah.
yeah, I knew Rex well.
Did you?
Oh yeah. In fact, something kind of interesting is that Rex and Johnson, you know, Johnson had, I think it was something like 12 to 22 victories. I've forgotten. He's the guy that led the flight.
Okay.
And you know the background on it, why they picked the P-38s that had the distance and how what a miracle it was to, well, when I was president of the association, P-38 National Association, they needed some help to get Barber, because he had been recognized by about 5 research organizations that had gone to where Yamamoto went into the jungle and his staff in those 2 Bettys and measured how the shells had come into the airplane and hit Yamamoto and that crew and that so they could tell, you know, what kind of an airplane or where the airplane was that shot it. And so Lampier, who was the killer flight leader, as you know, he turned when they finally went after him. These Zeros came down and kind of got in the way. He went after them, and then after that he started shooting at the Bettys from a distance. Well, his wingman, which is Barber, as a first lieutenant, had gone. He went after what he was supposed to go after. And so I'm not saying Lamprey was wrong, because those Zeros could have knocked them both down, but the point was that he went after the Bettys, and he got the devil shot out of him, but at the same time he did shoot the Betty down, and then he went after the other one, and so forth. When they came back, Lampier sounded off, because he was kind of a political guy, as you know, because I think he was looking for a political future. He broadcast that he had knocked down Yamamoto, which made Admiral Nimitz mad. Did you know about that?
No, I knew there was a controversy, but I
Well, the
didn't know
reason they
about
picked
Nimitz.
the 38s to begin with, rather than the Navy, was they had no Navy airplanes that could make this flight, this
Right.
distance. And then when they got them, and they knew they got them because they got both the Bettys. It was a miracle they found them to begin with. But they got both the Bettys. Well, these research outfits had gone back in there and measured the shells that had come in, so they knew which ones had knocked the airplane down. And Barber was the only one that was in that position to do that. And Lampier was firing, and there was no shells that came in apparently that did this job. So, but Barber apparently was very, what's the word for it, non-self-effacing, or whatever you want to call it. He didn't talk much about it. So when Lampier said that he got him, he didn't really much say anything to begin with. Well, he felt he really had knocked him down and so on. Well, Nimitz, you know, they were going to give him the Congressional Medal of Honor for doing this, which they should have gotten, because it changed the face of the war, as you know, and so on. They lowered their morale and everything, that they had lost Yamamoto, and the troops weren't happy anymore, and all that stuff. Well, as you know, the Americans had broken the Japanese code, and the Navy, rightly so, wanted to keep it a big secret, because we knew what they were doing in so many things, because we intercepted their message and knew what they were saying. That's how they got Yamamoto to begin with. They knew he was going to be there. Nimitz was so mad he wanted to court-martial him. So instead of giving him the Medal of Honor, he finally gave him a Silver Star, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Well, all these research outfits have more or less, what's the word for it, lobbied to try and get Barber the recognition of getting Yamamoto, which he should have had. Well, he, as you know, was a full colonel. He got 30 years in service or so, went back to Oregon, near Bend, Oregon, and so now they were going to try and get him a new bridge, the Crooked River Bridge near Bend, Oregon, named after him. It was going to be the Rex Barber Veterans Memorial Bridge. Excuse me. Well, this was controlled by the Department of Transportation and the director of the Transportation Department. And they told him what they wanted, and he says, well, our regulations, you know, political situations, is that we always only name things like the bridge, which was really too small anyway to give it much of a name, I guess, but still it was a brand new bridge which everybody wanted to give Barber the recognition of getting this beautiful but smaller bridge taken care of. I've got some pictures here if you wanted to look at it and see what it's like. So we started to campaign for Barber. And I got paid people to write letters to the congressman and so on from Oregon and tell them that what we thought, that he should be given the Medal of Honor, and also this bridge should be named after him and so forth, because he's really a national hero, and certainly for Oregon. And Barber has spent his life there when he wasn't in the service, and he was a minister for something like 8 or 10 years. He was a mayor of his town, and so on and so on, and then he finally passed on. Well, lo and behold, we had a resolutions by the P-38 National Association that I wrote, and I sent it to the Department of Transportation, and I told them this again, that he was a national hero, and the P-38 National Association felt that Barber should be given this recognition. And lo and behold, he sent me a email back saying we're going to do it. Now, we don't know whether we were the key ones to do it or the other organizations, because the ACES Association, the P-38 National Association, I think the Marines, the Navy, you name it, had apparently all done something like this, like written to the congressman and to Representative Clarno, which is a lady who knew the family and wanted to do it. Anyway, it got entered into the legislature, and they notified me back that we should take and send it to this PR fellow in their legislature group. Anyway, it all happened. Now it's starting to work. They're working on the Medal of Honor for him. Ooh. And they sent me a wire saying exactly what it would say, but they didn't say that they had actually gotten Congress to authorize it yet, so I don't know. Yeah. But the thing is, we got well involved with Barber, because we wanted him. I've been to a number of banquets where they had different aces come in and so forth, and we'd meet the people, and these people would pay maybe $150 or whatnot, or $500 a plate, and of course we were all guests and so on, so we could go, otherwise we'd never been able to eat. But I've been to a number of things with Barber, and he and I were friends.
It's really special for you. So when you came back to the States, when was that, and how did you get back? Come back on a ship again, or what?
Okay, I came back to the States on the 18th of September with a number of the other fellows. We came back via Dakar and Natal, Brazil, and then back into, I think it was into Florida. I got
on an aircraft?
C-54s. Yeah, C-54s. And it was so great to get good food and, you know, and so on, and these milk and everything in Brazil, and it's like being in heaven, you know. They gave us all leave. I had 30 days leave, and went to my parents' place, to my father with his new wife, and spent 30 days there, and met my new wife-to-be at that time, which I was married to for 32 years, and then she passed on.
Oh, and what was her name, her maiden name?
Her name was Janice Hauk.
And so this was in, where, New Jersey?
No,
Yeah.
I was supposed to go by the Pentagon as soon as I was ready to go to New Jersey,
Yeah.
the redistribution station. And in the meantime, I got a recurrence of malaria, so I went to the Coral Gables Hospital in Florida, and had my Atterburn again and my quinine, and still weak as could be. But then I reported in, and they tried to get me made a second lieutenant. Well, the group commander, I was the only flight officer that he tried to get to be made a flight officer, to be made a second lieutenant, get a promotion before I came home. And he put in a letter, which I have a copy of, that said that he wants them to expedite the paperwork as much as possible so I can get to be, you know, appointed as second lieutenant before I leave the area, and the papers never came back. So when a person leaves an area, or even leaves the States and they go overseas, the papers never follow them. Well, they tried to get me a second lieutenancy when I got to the redistribution station in New Jersey, and it wasn't able to get through. And they go back on you. Well, you know, you're supposed to be this, you're supposed to be that. Every I has to be dotted and all T's crossed and so on. Anyway, I was assigned, but I was recommended by the squadron commander to be a twin-engine fighter pilot instructor, and tactics and gunnery and so on. And that's what happened. I was assigned to Van Nuys and the group that
Okay, but where did you meet Janice? Where did you meet your wife?
when I was home on leave in Charlotte.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And so when I got back to Van Nuys, she came out because she went to Florida with me when I was having malaria. And then she came out to Van Nuys, and we were married there. Tom Harmon and his wife were at our wedding.
Really?
This is when Andy Devine was the president of the Van Nuys Airport, and so on. So we used to see him every now and then. And I was there until they closed the P-38s and the P-61s they had down, because I instructed in P-38s in combat tactics and aerial gunnery and so on. And and Colonel Chenault, who was the base commander and had the fighter units there, who was General Chenault's son, put me in for second lieutenant and got it through finally. So about 6 months after the original one went in overseas, I got it in, this would be in 1944. I forget the exact date. I think I've got it here if you want it. But as soon as I got second lieutenant, they put me in for first lieutenant. They made me wait 6 months, then they gave me first lieutenant. Then they tried to make me a captain, and that time they had frozen everything, so I waited 9 years.
Okay, so you met your wife in Charlotte then, you said, when you were, okay, that's when you were. And what was she doing when you met her there?
She was working in a business and so forth, little cleaners there near where we lived.
And how did you know Tommy Harmon?
Well, Tommy was assigned to Van Nuys as an instructor. And, I was going to tell you, I got all of the ranking people. Here I was just a flight officer. And I got all the ranking majors who had ground jobs that came in with the classes. Maybe because I was a flight officer and had the lowest rank, and I had to give them heck in the air to keep them up in formation and on. And I get on the ground, and they gave me heck on the ground. Well, he finally made me a second lieutenant to give me a little bit of equality, I think.
Yeah.
And then he had to wait, I don't know, whatever the requirement was, to be first, something like 6 months or some darn thing. I don't know. They sent the paperwork back. But anyway, I love that place. I love those orange groves. I was married there, and we had our first daughter there over in Pasadena, in the military hospital there, former hotel. In fact, and then when they took all the P-38s down, as soon as the war was over, you know, they started destroying them all. But before that, they knew they apparently were going to close it down. They brought P-61s into Van Nuys, and I wanted to stay at Van Nuys by that time. I'd been there so long, close to 2 years, I think. Why, they let me transfer over. I checked out and became an instructor in the P-61, where before I was an instructor on the standardization board, where I made sure everybody was flying the same way, you know, getting the same instruction.
P-61, was that the Black Widow?
Black Widow.
It was a night fighter?
Night fighter, right. Yeah, I remember one flight I had, the sailor came in, and we used to give people rides if they wanted to go up, you know. And I was teaching my flight at this time, ground gunnery, over in Bakersfield behind the mountains. And so the sailor came in and he wanted to go up, so I said, okay, getting back. And it took my flight over there, 4 of us, and we went and came into the ground gunnery pattern. And the P-61 had 12mm cannons on them underneath. And boy, you could just cut a target to pieces with those things, because you could actually violate the range position and continue on in firing. And you get so close to that target, you just tear it completely apart. And I used to love to try and do that. But anyway, my students all would fire, you know, like they were supposed to, right down so they could see. And then we had somebody on the ground that counted the hits and sent it back to Van Nuys. Well, I started down, and all of a sudden, my right engine quit. Actually, what happened is the propellers went into full feather. So I only had one engine, and they were going right on top of the ground, coming right down in the middle of these mountains, and one engine quit. So I feathered it up. By this time, I wasn't worried. I thought, here, I had an airplane that would climb out like the P-38. It was hot over there, a lot of thermals. And I turned around and looked at the sailor, and he was as white as his uniform. Poor guy. But he didn't get sick. I don't think he got sick. Anyway, I called the flight off, and they got on me, and I started up the valley thinking I was going to climb up. Well, the airplane actually was underpowered for, you know, for the weight that was there. And it wouldn't climb an inch. And the ground was coming up to meet me. And you have these, what they call spoilers on the first P-61s, which spoil the air and drop the wing instead of ailerons. Well, I had to be real careful when I made the airplane turn that I didn't drop a wing too much, because I was almost on the ground. And so I finally got turned around and came back down and found an opening and came out. And I couldn't get the airplane up to past about 5,000, 6,000 feet in that heat and thermals. It just wouldn't get any higher, and you had to get up to 8,500 minimum to get through the pass to get back to Van Nuys. So I sent my element leader home and had the wingman go into Bakersfield, who didn't have our frequencies. We didn't have theirs, where the transports came in, and say, what I'd like you to do is go in there and tell the tower that I'm out here on single engine and I'm coming in, so keep everybody out of the way, because I'm coming when I come. Because once I put my gear down, I'm committed, just like that P-38 I was telling you about. And so he did. He went in, and I came around, and they gave me a green light. I landed the airplane. It turned out that the cannon plug had come out of its receptacle and caused the props to feather. So the airplane was fixed as soon as I got a mechanic over from Van Nuys. So I left my wingman there for the mechanic, and then I went on back, and then we flew the airplane back on a little later on. But that was an interesting experience with the P-61. Well, you asked about Tommy Harmon. Tommy Harmon was assigned to Van Nuys I think I'd been there about almost a year when he came in. And he was a friend of mine, and I liked Tom. And of course, he was Mr. Michigan when he was in the,
Absolutely.
you know, in college.
Yeah.
And he was a big, strong guy. And we used to play volleyball. I was on the volleyball team with him. And something kind of happened, you know, because he was a famous fellow, and I think he was in broadcasting, so he got out of the service when he could.
Yeah.
But that was my experience with Tom and his wife and so forth.
I had one of these Life magazines in here. It has a full-page picture of his wife before she got married, and apparently Tom got shot down and bailed out over in the Pacific, and had brought his parachute back, and they had made her bridal dress out of his parachute.
Oh, really?
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
I'll
I
have to
didn't
show
know
you,
that.
show you that one of these days. Yeah. Now, did he fly P-38s too, Tom, when he was
Yeah,
in
he was
combat?
P-38 instructor.
So, was there any thought that you might be sent to the Pacific before the war was over? I mean, a lot of guys, when they came back, you know, there
Well,
was some...
we were sending people over. A lot of my students actually went into my outfit over in Italy, where they were stationed in 15th Air Force, and told me they looked at the squadron victory board, you know, with my name on it and so forth.
Yeah.
And so the students we had were going to the combat units around the world.
Yeah. Okay, when the war was over, apparently you stayed in the service. What was going through your mind then? Were you thinking about getting out or what?
They came through with an order that they would allow anybody in the service who was flyer to get out of the service and go into the airlines if you wanted to. If you could, you could pass all the exams and so on. Well, I decided that I was going to get out, so I put in my letter. And a lieutenant colonel put in his letter, and a buddy of mine, a Captain Hicks, put in his. Well, I waited about a week, and I said, you know, I like the service so well, and it's let me fly fighters all this time, and they're still letting me fly it, and I think I'm going to stay in. So I withdrew my letter. Well, they got out and went with the airlines. It was kind of interesting with this Captain Hicks. When I was base operations officer at Clark Field in the Far East years later, came in with a Flying Tiger C-54 to go to Vietnam, and he was carrying hay. What happened, my career would have been about duplicate of his. When he got out, he went to these feeder lines that were throughout the South of the United States. And when they'd have financial problems, they'd put the people out because they'd start him as co-pilot. Then he'd go to another one and start again as a co-pilot. Then he'd go to another one and start again as a co-pilot. And that seemed to keep happening to him. And he finally joined the Flying Tigers and became a captain because he was a good pilot. He was a good instructor and everything. But that's what was happening. That would have happened to me. And here when he came in, because I was in charge of everything that went on in Clark Field, including the Air Transport Command and so forth, where these airliners would come in to go to Vietnam and other places. And so I was down there one night, and here come my friend Captain Hicks, the airplane full of hay. So I was always happy I stayed in.
Did you, so where did you go from, after the war was over? Where did you stayed in? Where did you go then?
Okay, as soon as they closed up Van Nuys, they sent everybody, I guess they sent them other places too, but they sent me, along with a number of the other guys, to Hammer Field. I was assistant operations officer at Fresno, Fresno, California. And they had a couple of night fighters, which I've got a picture of one right here, just a P-38 night fighter, which never got into combat. The P-38 didn't, as I remember it. The P-61s did.
Right.
Okay. The base commander had I think maybe just one, not two. And he'd been flying it, and he let me fly it because, of my background and experience as P-38s. So I decided I'd try and see what kind of an airplane it was, even though that's not too good for because it's got radar on board. It's got that little thing that fits under the front. And he didn't tell me not to. I didn't even know he had a policy, but he had a policy. Nobody will do acrobatics with this night fighter P-38 under 8,000 feet. And I was doing acrobatics around 4,000 to 6,000 feet. I was doing Emmelmans and loops. And he caught me, so he grounded me from that one. So, but it didn't make any difference because I was only there for about, I don't know, 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks. And then they assigned, they were trying to get either the people out of the service or assigned to various places. So they put about 8 to 10 of us, as I remember, up into a radar station under the Signal Corps above Berkeley. So I went up there for about 6 months, and then I was accepted by the fighter group down at 1st Fighter Group at March Field. We were flying P-80s. So I flew a bunch of my stuff down, all of my war souvenirs, this swastika I'd gotten while I was over in Tunisia, which I wanted to keep and had in a barracks bag.
Describe the P-80. Is that a jet?
Oh yeah, that's America's first real jet.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
The P-59 was our first test jet, but and had twin engines, but it was a little bit heavy and underpowered. The P-80 was a real combat airplane. They used them in Vietnam, Korea, and so forth. At least in Korea.
Who built the P-80s?
Was Lockheed. Something I might mention to you is that on my way over to see my uncle, he was living in Glendale from Van Nuys, while my wife and I were, living in, and I was instructing. There was a big, we used to go by the Lockheed factory where they build all these P-80s and stuff. And there was a big pier or pyre of smoke out there where an airplane looked like it had gone in as we were on our way over to Glendale from Van Nuys. So we decided to go over and see what had happened. And the ground was just covered with little pieces of the P-80, this aluminum. We found out that Dick Bong had gone in.
Oh, yeah.
And I had picked up a piece of this and put it in my pocket without thinking much about it. And then I found out it was Bong, and I still got this little piece of his airplane where he got killed.
Oh, good idea.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it was.
But anyway, before I could get down and be with the P-80 outfit, they had transferred me to Greensboro and put me on a ship and sent me to Panama. So I was assigned down to Panama, and there were so many fighter pilots around because now the Air Force was trying to get, rid of all these people they had of all ranks who were not regulars. I was assigned as Special Service Officer at France Field. That was on the Atlantic side. So I controlled the crash boats and the theaters and, the gymnasium, and learned all about supply and records there. And then I was finally, because I was dying to get back into fighters, and they had the 36th Fighter Wing over at Howard Field, commanded by Colonel Spicer, now General Spicer, Russ Spicer, a wonderful guy. Well, Bruce Hinton, who got the first jet in Korea, enemy jet, was the squadron commander of that at France Field while I was there. And I met him when I went to the ACES convention, and he came up and tapped me on the shoulder, and here I'd known him in Panama and so forth. Well, anyway, they had P-47s, so I checked out in a P-47 real quick, got a few hours, went over to Howard Field, and ferried the P-47 up to Jamaica and then back to the States and so on. And then we checked out in P-80s because we were converting over to P-80s. So I checked out in P-80s after bringing one in from Lockheed. We brought the whole outfit in.
Was that a difficult transition going to jets?
Well, flying a jet is kind of a new experience for anybody that's ever flown just, normal conventional prop airplanes. It's an easy airplane to fly as long as you know what to do. But it doesn't give you much sensation like the other ones do. You can kind of manhandle the other ones. It just goes through the air like greased lightning, and slowing it down is even an interesting problem. But it's not a problem if you know what to do. You just start earlier, you know, and so on. But I love the P-80. And so we checked out, and then we came back to the States with my wife, and we went up to Niagara Falls. We'd never been there. We got a new car. That's the word that were starting to come out, and which I was going to sell, and so on, and just continue on. We wanted it for our so-called vacation. When I was back there, I got this telegram from my commander saying, we're getting ready to go to Scotland. We're going to go on a baby flat top. If you want to go, get back here right now. So I did. I found a place for my wife and Charlotte and the kids, my 2 girls and a little boy that we had adopted. And I adopted my sister's son who had been deceased. And so now I had 3 children. And let's see, what had happened. No, I take it back. I hadn't adopted my son yet, so scrub that. Just my 2 daughters and my wife. And so they had a place to stay, so I went back. They had put everybody's things out of their houses in this big hangar with nothing, you know, about 4 feet between piles, put a person's name on it, and they had the whole wing had almost 100 airplanes. All those people, their furniture was just left there. We all got in this baby flat top that had been brought down special to pick us up. They put all our airplanes on top of this this baby flat top, gumped them all down, went through the canal, and we ended up in Scotland about 2 weeks later. They took the airplanes off the carrier, and they taxied them right through the center of Glasgow, right downtown, out to the airport, where they degunked them all. We gave them 1 flight, flew over to the Channel, flew over to Fürstenfeldbruck in Germany, and we were over there for 6 months while we just trained, because we were there to protect the Berlin airlift if the Russians did anything.
Those are P-80s?
With P-80s. And let's see, what can I tell you? Oh, I had an interesting experience in Scotland, in Glasgow. You know, all the Americans had come back from Great Britain and so on after the war and so forth. And so here it was, 1947 or so. Okay, 4 of us decided we were going to go to town. And we got in on Saturday night, and they were taking the airplanes off, so we didn't have anything to do while they did this. So we got dressed up in our blues and pinks, and we decided to go to town. We went to town about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's a beautiful day. Everybody was in church. There were cobblestone streets and small sidewalks, and it was too small a sidewalk for us to walk, you know, together, shoulder to shoulder. So we got out in the street. There wasn't anything out there anyway. So we came around this corner of this beautiful day, and we ran smack into this elderly Scottish couple. And I guess they were on their way to church or just leaving or whatever. But he took one look at us in our pinks and greens, all dressed up. We looked fine. He says, "My God, the bloody Yanks are back again." Never forget that.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. In fact, I got on their buses and I learned a little bit of Scotch, you know, and "'Tis a broad bray, moonlit nick the nick." That means it's a nice evening. Moonlit. So, anyway, we were over there flying in what they call the Randolph Field of Germany, which is Fürstenfeldbruck in Bavaria, southern Bavaria. And then I played football while I was there. They had, it seemed like the generals of all the bases in Germany were interested in having a football team and winning the championship for their own base. Well, whenever they found anybody who had been a college star or when they'd been a pro or anything like that, they always made sure they were assigned to their place and they played football. Well, the First and Fellbrook Eagles had a good team, and they had won every game and only allowed 6 points all season. Now they were playing for the championship. And we were over there with our F-80s and, and skidding around the ice and snow and so on and so forth, everything that you do when you're over there that long. But we used to play touch football, and I was kind of fleet-footed and so on. So they saw me, and they needed wingbacks. They were short on wingbacks. And Cass Myslinski, who was one of the Four Horsemen in... was it the Four Horsemen? Anyway, you remember Cass Myslinski, Blanchard, and Davis?
Oh, that was Army.
Army?
Right.
Well, Cass was the fullback and the
Oh,
captain
okay.
of the team.
Yeah.
And so he tried me out. So he says, see that hole there? He says, you go through it. So they brought in their two teams. They gave me the ball. I didn't even know what they were doing. And I went through this thing like a jackrabbit, and I made a touchdown. They said, that's got to be a mistake. So let's do it again. So they picked out another hole, and they gave me the ball, and I made another touchdown. Because I didn't let anybody near me, and I was fleet enough to be able to jump around. Well, lo and behold, they put me in the champion playoff game with the Marines, and I made a touchdown. And then we played one other game. It was kind of a practice game, and I made a touchdown on that, and that was the end of my football career. And I always thought to myself, that was a foolish thing for me to do, because if I'd have gotten hurt, I wouldn't have any flying pay or anything, But it was quite an experience, to be able to do that. And later, when I came back to the States, I applied for the football team at Scott Field, because I went through communication school. After I came back, I was assigned to March Field. They said, we want you, but we don't have a place for you. We got a list of people who want to get in this F-86 first fighter group like this, over 100 or so of key people. Why don't you find something? You go to school for a year, and when you come back, we'll have an opening for you. So I said, okay. So I went in, and they had cooks and baker school, motor pool, communication school. That's to fix radios, I thought. So I'll go there. It's just a year long. So off we went to Scott Field. School, and I kind of enjoyed it. We studied everything about the tubes that they don't have anymore and all that sort of thing, but how to fix teletype machines and all that sort of thing. Well, when we came back to March Field, they had a spot for me. I was a new communications officer. I had a special critical AFSC. So then they transferred the P-30. I'm sorry, the squadrons of F-86s back to Victorville, and I had a real good communications section with a real good sergeant who was real sharp, and so he was able to take care of it. I was able to fly, which is what I really wanted to do. Well, then they took our squadron and sent us back to Rome, New York, and then they put us down at Greater Pittsburgh Airport. So we patrolled the northern part of the United States in the F-86s in case the Russians came over the poles.
And how the performance of the F-86 compared to the P-80?
Oh, the F-86 is twice the fighter. Even though the P-80 was a good airplane and did a lot of good work, I guess it was in Korea, ground support and so on. The F-86 was an equal to the MiG, the MiG-21, right, and so on. And so, we ended up with a real good score on the American side against the MiGs and so on, something like a ratio of, what, 10 to 1?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And who built the F-86?
The F-86, North American.
North American, that was still North American, yeah.
And I was in the 71st Fighter Squadron, and as soon as I got to Victorville,
I'm trying to think, I was made a flight commander, because I had a lot of time, naturally, and in jets, and so, anyway, I quit being communications officer, so that all worked out beautifully for a while, until I got over in the Far East. I have to tell you about that.
Okay.
But anyway, I was with the F-86 outfit, and the new squadron commander that I was with was Robin Olds. Do you remember his name?
I've heard that name.
And he's a general. He retired general. His father was a general. I think his father was a 2-star. He was a 1. And he's a tremendous guy. And I was with George Davis, who got the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously. When he got killed knocking down his 13th MiG. He would have been our top American ace in jets, without a doubt. He was a crack shot and a wonderful pilot, but he got a little bit too careless. He was after another one. He'd knocked one down already and was after another one, and he didn't see this new second lieutenant coming up on him, and the lieutenant got him. So they gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor and gave it to his wife, and she was ready to sue the Air Force because she said they kept her husband over there against his will, made him fly a second mission, and he had made lieutenant colonel from major, and that wasn't so. He wanted to stay. He wanted to fly combat. But
So
she was sure mad at him.
It was a mid-air crash with, is that when you
No,
said?
this guy came up, the
it was
MiGs had cannons.
Oh, a MiG, okay,
Yeah.
second lieutenant, okay.
So they got George, and he's in the books and all, and he was such a wonderful guy. I still miss him. He's a good friend of mine and my wife's. But anyway, and then Robin Olds, a wonderful combat leader. He was like Patton, except he was in the air. He didn't like politicians or politics, but he was a good commander. Well, he explained one of the tactics he used to get MiGs now and then. The MiGs could fly higher than the F-86 by about 2,000 or 3,000 feet, something like that. So they'd get up and stay out of the way if they wanted to, and not come down for fighting. And the way he'd do it, because he was flying Voodoos,
What's a Voodoo?
It's a American fighter.
Okay.
Okay. He'd get his flight of 4, and he'd get down next to the ground. And this is a supersonic airplane, the Voodoo, but it carried 2 people. And what they'd do is they'd put down their wheels and their flaps, and they'd fly along, and they would look like, not like a Voodoo. They would look like a slow airplane that was, an easy kill for the commies. And they'd fly along, and they'd be going down slow, and these communist pilots would see them down there going so slow in formation, so they knew they were fighters. They thought they were trainers. And so they'd come down, getting ready to get after them. The minute they'd see them coming, they'd pull up their gear, pull up their flaps and their dive brakes, and give it full power and go in about as fast as they could go, and they'd go up and they'd nail these guys before they could get up where they couldn't get to them. That was one of his techniques for getting the MiGs. Something else. Anyway, when I was at Greater Pittsburgh Airport, I went to jet instrument school down at Panama City, became a jet instrument instructor, came back and started giving everybody in my squadron their instrument checks. And then they sent me off to Otis Air Force Base to start the Eastern Air Defense Force Jet Instrument School.
Where's that?
At Otis, near Boston.
Okay.
And I used to give the all-weather squadron that was also at Otis their instrument checks. We used to take off in T-33s, which is a extended P-80. They use those all over the world and so on, primarily for transition and training and instrument checks. It's a good instrument airplane. And I used to bring them all the way back to California, give them their checks. And here they were already all-weather pilots, who are the best pilots you can find in the world. And I'd bring them all the way back and give them a thorough check, all their letdowns and everything. And we'd go off
because they had the worst weather in the world at Otis. That's why they put it there. And I ran the ground school. And I'd also give instrument checks and so on to these fellas. And this is the squadron that the black 4-star general had when he was a colonel. And he was there and so on. That was interesting. I stayed there about 3 months and got a letter of commendation and came back. Then I was assigned to Selfridge Air Force Base in Michigan, which is one of our oldest Air Force bases in our country. And I was the flying safety officer for 9 different type units, aircraft units. And I found that very interesting, and I used to report to the commander on all these airplanes and anybody that had any flights. And we had an airplane, a T-38 that blew up on takeoff coming out of Barksdale, I think at Shreveport, Louisiana. And I happened to have gotten I was visiting my uncle back in Glendale who had cancer, and I flew back in an F-86 I'd taken from one of the 71st where I came from, because I was allowed to, do that and fly and get my time. And I was sitting on my uncle's bed Saturday night, and I had landed at LA International. And all they had was a little unit down there where they could give a small amount of fuel to certain airplanes, and kind of a military unit, but not really a unit. It was just kind of there with some of those, airliners and so on. So you could bring an airplane in like I did. And I was sitting on the side of his bed over in Glendale, and I got this call from my commander from the 71st said, your commander, Colonel Royal, has just called. We just had a major accident down at Shreveport, Louisiana. He wants you out there tomorrow afternoon. Take the accident away from SAC because they'll crucify our pilots. And although they shouldn't have had it blow up, they shouldn't lose their careers because SAC is so rough. So you get out there and get all the accident information, get all the photos, take it away from SAC, and make sure our pilots get back here in Michigan or wherever they came from of this 4708 Defense Wing, which is the largest wing in Eastern Air Defense Force. And I'll see it, and he wants to see it at Selfridge tomorrow night, Sunday night. Now here's a Saturday night, and Sunday night he wants me there with all this information, because all the commanders were tasked, if they had a major accident, they had to fly like over to Washington or somewhere close by their headquarters and report personally to the general, the base commander of this big, beautiful base, had to fly all the way to the major headquarters and brief the commanding general why one of the fighters had a major accident. That's how tough they were on, that type of thing. And which really, when you get right down to it, isn't too bad, because when I did some training of the Nationalist Air Force in Taiwan, and before they got their jets, and if one of those pilots did anything wrong, they'd flat shoot him.
Oh.
If they, happen to forget his gear and land and, lose an airplane, they just shoot him. No accident. You want to stay alive. But anyway, here's the commander reporting to the commanding general of Eastern Air Defense Force, the largest fighter base in Eastern Air Defense Force. And so what I did, my airplane was down to about 90 gallons of fuel, and you need a minimum of 160 when you're on approach to land. And here I only had 90 gallons. So I said, yes, sir, I'll certainly do everything I can. So I called down to LA International, and I said, look, I have to get out of here. I need fuel. And they said, well, we don't have any fuel, really. We can maybe get you about 60 gallons. That'd give me about 100, maybe 160 is what they get me up to. But that's all we got. Well, that isn't enough to even be in the pattern to land. But I had a lot of experience in cruise control and getting, distance out of F-86s by this time, because I used to teach it, you know, to the other pilots in my squadron, and also in instrument school. So I said, well, please put that fuel in my airplane. I'm coming out in the morning, and I've got to get it over to at least March Field, where I can get my fuel, get my airplane fueled up, because I got to go back east. So that's what they did. They put the 60 gallons in, and I had 155, 160, whatever, fuel. And when I got down there was an overcast at about, I guess about 700-800 feet. So everything was instruments. And that usually takes, you know, special things, formation or whatever, you know, you have to do on instruments. And so I called the tower and I said, look, and operations, I said, look, I've got to get over to March Field. What I want to do is I want to file an instrument flight plan, and I'll file my plan with you, and as soon as you're ready to let me go, you tell me, and I'll start up the engine, and by the time that it reaches, you know, gets going, 40% or 50%, whatever, 40%, I'll be moving, and I'll be on my way, because I'm not going to stop. I don't have any fuel to do that. So they said, okay. So we kept the starter unit going, and I listened to the tower. They finally came through with my instrument clearance. It came out of the, you know, the FAA or whatever. And I had filed to go to March Field, which was, you know how far it is from LA International to March Field. It's some little distance. So anyway, that's what happened. As soon as they called me, I said, okay, I'm on my way. So I gave them the signal, I cut it in, started the engine, and pushed the throttle forward, and as soon as it came up there, the airplane started to move, you know. I had all the chocks on. I went tearing off that runway and went up to that ceiling, and went to 10,000 feet, pulled my power almost all the way back, and glided all the way to March Field. And I called them and told them I had an emergency landing. I wasn't going to be able to do anything but come in and land, clear the field. So they did. It was, by this time, it's a SAC base. After we left it, you know, First Fighter Group. So I landed, and everything worked out fine. And I think I shut down with about 25 gallons, something like that. But it's amazing what the airplane will do for you when you set it up, you know, you get it going and then pull the power back and all. So that worked out well. Well, anyway, when I left March Field, you normally only go about 650 miles with an F-86 with your tanks on and everything, because you've got to have so much fuel when you land for in case you have to go around or something. And so you normally go around 650 miles. Well, all the way back to Shreveport was about, I don't know, about 1,800 miles. Well, I took off and got up in the jet stream, and I got all the way to Shreveport. You got to have those winds going for you.
Yeah.
I landed. I was met by all those guards that, you know, that make you get out and get on the ground on your stomach with their machine guns. Their submachine guns. Anyway, I told them who I was, did what my commander told me to do. I took the accident away from SAC, got all their information, all their photographs, got the pilots out of there, and took off again. And I was at Selfridge that night, and the colonel met me personally as I got out of my airplane, and he got in an airplane and went to meet the commanding general. Anyway, I was there for, I guess, about 6 months. And then something came through where they wanted somebody to be a liaison officer with the Chinese nationalists in Taiwan from 13th Air Force at Clark Field. So I decided I wanted to get that. So I put in for it.
What year would this have been?
I got a note here.
Okay.
It was, okay, it was 1953.
Okay.
Yeah, because I got over there in in August of '54, no, 53. And when I came in, why, they had one jet squadron at Clark, the 44th Fighter Bomber Squadron, flying F-80s. And everybody wanted to get in. Everybody always wants to get in the good fighter outfits, you know, when they get there. Well, they assigned me there. They made me a flight commander, so I was happy as a lark for about a year. Then all of a sudden, somebody looked at my form, or they got a signal from Washington that I had a critical AFSC, and they jerked me out of there and made me the base communication officer, because I had this critical AFSC by going to school. I fought it, my commander fought it, we tried to get out of it. So I did that, and I ran all the telephones that we had on the base. I had 24 female operators running half of the manual system on the base, because that's like a city. And all the pilots from the Far East that need instrument checks or to check out in an airplane, they come in there to get their flying time, everything. So that worked out, and I went to night school at the University of the Philippines for, added up the total, because I was over there for about 4 years, and I went almost the whole time to
Your
night
family
school.
get to go with you?
Huh?
Was your family there too?
Well, when I first got over, they wouldn't let, but then they allowed me to do that. Then we had to live off the base, and that was a story in itself. We were in this kind of compound right outside the front gate, and I don't know if you remember the Hucks that used to fight with the Philippine Constabulary,
Right.
and with their machine guns and all. They were going on firing every night. We were getting under the bed every night. We finally got quarters on base, and that was a good experience, a good opportunity to take advantage of getting the right education, because I'd missed getting a regular commission because I didn't have any college when they were getting all these people out of the Air Force when I was in Panama.
Were they American teachers at the college?
Yeah, they were what they called exchange professors from the University of, what's this one in the East? It's a big university. They do a lot of work with people in different locations. We sent deans back as teachers to them, and they sent them
Not American University?
No. You're awfully close. Anyway, it was a real good setup, and it was a good place for the military to get education. And I finally got my degree in political science by doing this, by going about actually I went 3 years. I got some military credit and so on for about a year, because I've been to so many schools and so forth. But then they were very good about it, because they held the board and they finally took the AFSC back, took it away from me. Now I was assigned to base operations, so I became the base flight operations officer. I gave everybody in the Far East that came through Clark for that type of thing their instrument checks, kept all their records, checked them out in jets, and did everything necessary. And then the base operations officer, who was usually a lieutenant colonel or a major at minimum, left for the States. They made me the new base operations officer. Everybody outranked me that came by the place. He told me what to do, and I'd say, you can't tell me that. But it worked out. And then they switched the 44th Fighter Squadron to F-86Ds, which is an all-weather airplane, as you may know, and fires rockets and so forth, and operates at night and so on. Well, then I was able to transfer down, and I became the flight commander down there with them, and then I became the operations officer and even squadron commander for a little time while the new commander came in. And so I stayed there for 4 years, which was great, because you normally can only stay about 3, and I liked it, and they let me stay 4. And then I came back, and they assigned me to 9th Air Force Headquarters at Shaw Air Force Base, Sumter, South Carolina. And let me see if I've told you everything. Oh, I'll take that back. No, I applied for ROTC, instructor duty, because it was near, I wanted to get back to California near the water, so I applied for Long Beach City State College, UCLA, and so on and so on. And my orders came through, and I was report to Berkeley, UC. And the chancellor of the university had to approve your coming on. So I thought that was going to be kind of interesting because you know, they have a very fine institution, high requirements and all, and the chancellor has to approve it himself. So I came in, and he had approved it, and they sent me to command staff school and instructor school, and I came back and I ran Air Science 1 for 3 years, which worked out real well. And we started an Angel flight where they had the finest young ladies in the university as a part of it. They're with the military. Do you know about the Angels? Well, yeah, it's in my little book over there if you want to see it.
Okay.
The Angel commander of the Angel flight at the University of Colorado was former Miss America. Give you an idea of the type of gals they were. Nice looking girls, and the cadets picked the people, and they helped the chancellor at his teas and all that sort of thing, and served, you know, and so on, helped him, and so he was happy, and they were so patriotic. They did drill, and they bought their own uniforms, and they were a wonderful group of girls, just the very best. And so anyway, then I went to weapons controllers course for staff officers. I was being sent to Europe, to Germany. So I went, and we were supposed to go into radar, which I didn't want to do. It's one thing I always said I didn't want. I don't want to be any part of radar, because they don't have any airplanes. They only look at scopes. But they're very, very important, as you know. And I didn't want to be stationed in Texas. It seemed like it was too barren for me. And I forgot what else I didn't want, but that was it. Anyway, we got over to Europe. They had all the radar people they needed, and I was assigned as Chief of Reconnaissance Forces for Central Europe and England, which was in the Battle Command Headquarters of Europe. And I reported to a NATO French, 5-star French general. And we actually had, and I had controlled all the reconnaissance units in Central Europe and England, which were the Germans, the Americans, the British, and the French. And they were all nuclear, at least the Americans were nuclear armed to stop the Russians in case they decided to come through. And so I was over there for about 3 years. They sent me back to Washington to work with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the War Games group. And what they did, much to my great surprise, and I think I can talk about this with no problem at this time, when I walked in, they had a general in charge of us, and they had all these strike officers from SAC from all over the world, the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, every command you can imagine. We were all going to live together there for whatever time it took to run a complete nuclear attack on the Western world. And we were the Russian General Staff. Can you believe it? And I was in charge of the computer program to put it together so it became a final report. And this was sent to every commander throughout the world, including SAC. And basically what we did is we launched all the Russian missiles, and we knew where they all were, because we used to, you know, patrol the border all the time and have people going in there and checking. We knew what flashlights they had, which were night fighter, all-weather fighters, what Beagles, what Bears they had, which were their big long-range, you know, like SAC aircraft and so forth. And we knew where all their medium missiles were. We knew how many they had, and of course everybody had more than you could possibly ever use. You could strike a place and wipe it out 10 times, you know. But we knew it, and they had everything set up by computer, so it was all fixed out, knowing what the range was. If they go out, if they go down, how much fuel they'd use. If they go up, how much they'd use. If they could get back to their base, what the nuclear submarines would do when they launched their missiles, and so on. And just everything, and whether they came over the poles or whether they tried to come through Europe first and so on. they wanted to see what the results would be, and they had all this high-powered people living there in Washington at the Pentagon, working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and we were all the red communist general staff, and we naturally knew everything we had because, you know, we were there. We knew how many people we had in our deployment areas, how many, naturally, how many ships we had, how many missiles we had, what they could do, what their range was. And the interesting part was, and this was really something they were never too sure of, but they found out when they worked it through a computer, and I ran the computer program because I was kept there an extra 2 weeks to put it together and finalize it, because people had to go back, you know, to where they came from, because they came out like the 7th Fleet and the Italian, the fleet in Italy and in SAC and all the outlying islands in the Pacific, and you name it, and everywhere. That they found out that the Russians couldn't possibly attack the United States without our knowing it. Because if they launched an attack on the United States, like on Sunday morning when everybody's in church, like the Japanese when they hit Pearl Harbor, because of the different time zones, we would know it. Because if they came, you know, from one place, they couldn't come through Europe and hit everything in Europe, you know, and knock out the Germans and the French and the British and all that. And we knew they could do it, but we were going to slow them down. And using their nuclear submarines and all the rest of them with their missiles. No matter how much we killed every target you could possibly imagine, we knew we could wipe out New York and Chicago and all, but you couldn't do it without getting SAC in the air, and they're going to wipe out half of Russia too. So we knew that was worthwhile, and that went to every commander in the world. And right after that, I was made lieutenant colonel. So I figured it might have had something to do with it.
Yeah.
But then I was sent back to the United States after being over there about 3 years, and this was in 1964. And I was assigned to 9th Air Force Headquarters, Sumter, South Carolina, which was tactical headquarters. And I was the assistant director of command and control, and I used to brief the generals every morning on where every TAC aircraft was in the world. If they were flying, like Alaska and the Pacific and Japan and the United States, you name it, wherever they were. And this was about the time that the Cuban crisis came along. And so we were highly involved in, you know, what was happening and where the tactical aircraft were. And, you know, we actually, as, well, anyway, when the Cuban crisis, missile crisis came along, we actually launched SAC airplanes with, you know, like 6 missiles in each aircraft that were on their way to destroy Russian targets, because they figured the war was that close, you know, and it's the only thing we could do. And then they backed down, right. And that worked. And then while I was there, the general was General McNichol, who was a 2-star at the time, and this is when the Air Force came out with this reduction in forces and so forth, and they're going to rotate people and put them out of the service. And so by that time I had 24 years, and so I got out. Now I think, if I'm not mistaken, you'd like to know a little bit more about I did after?
Oh, yeah, we'll get to, so what year was that you got out then?
I got out in August of 64.
August, yes.
I
Okay.
can't believe I'm remembering all these things.
Okay, so then what did you do when you got out?
Okay, well, I came back to California, and I had worked to get a broker's license in real estate, and I was also doing business consulting. And it just so happened that there was a friend of mine who was the president of 3 small corporations, but made a lot of money. He worked with insurance outfits, you know, for fire and water and all that type of thing. And it made a lot of money, and he was going bankrupt. So I analyzed his business, and he asked me to stay. And so I stayed, and he was my client for 9 years.
Where was this?
This was in, he was in Garden Grove. And he had a corporation in Riverside and one in San Diego. And while we were together, he made about $30 million, so he did okay. Except that he was a wonderful PR man. He could get all kinds of good business, from the insurance companies, but he wanted to give everything away. And he liked to invest in real estate, so I bought all these real estate properties for him. And we were together for 9 years, and everything was just peachy keen. I left him, and he went bankrupt a year after I left him. By this time, I was 65 years old, and I decided I was going to retire. So that's probably, well, let's see, what's happened since.
Okay, so you retired, so that would have been, what year did you retire then?
Well, let's see, I was 65 years old, and I'm 71 now, almost 72, so I have to go back to that.
Yeah.
So 65, 75, 85, 15, it must have been around 90, 1990,
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
And so you were living at that time, where were you living then?
Well, when I came back, we bought a home in Laguna Beach, and it was right on the edge of the canyon there, where we could look down and see the Festival of Arts and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
yeah.
then finally we sold it, and so on. And in the meantime, why things weren't working out too well, so I got a divorce and so forth, and then I got married again, and once or a couple times, and I got a wonderful wife.
Oh, what's your wife's name now?
Her name is Connie Lou.
And where did you meet her?
We met in Newport Beach and so forth and so on, so it worked out very well.
Does she have children also?
She had children from being married before, too. So now I live at Date Palm Country Club, which is a mobile home executive golf course, 18-hole. So get a lot of golf in. I'm still trying to learn how to hit the ball.
So when did you first start coming to the desert then?
Well, we came about a little over 12 years ago, I think. We came from Newport Beach. Oh, there's one thing that you might like to know about. I thought I needed something to do when I was living in these in the Versailles condominiums across from Hogue Hospital, and where we had a kind of an ocean view through the various structures down there. And so I went out and I asked the fella who was at the gate, the guard, who he worked for. And he told me, and it was an outfit that had guard units all over California and even up into Utah, and so on, under contracts. So I went up and I said, hey, I'd like something to do, so they let me be a guard. So I was letting trucks in and so on and so forth. And then I said, well, look, you're not making very much money doing this, they're paying pretty close to minimum wage. I said, I'd like to make a little bit more money and do a little bit more things than I'm doing. I'd like to, is there any place that you can make more? And they said, well, if you work for Ford Aerospace, they, make more money. They make maybe $9 or $10 an hour, and they got secret, top secret type of contracts. And McDonnell Douglas is up there, and they got, a big facility up there. So I went up there, and they gave me a job, and I was the assistant shift commander of the midnight shift, the worst shift of all, the midnight, and you come on again at 8 o'clock in the morning, and so on at 6 o'clock. And it was quite a facility, because it was not only a top secret organization with McDonnell Douglas, but it was where they kept all their top secret contracts going. They had so many secret things going on that the people that were in the facility, which was a tremendous sized building and with outlying building, didn't even know who the other people were who were working on contracts for them. And of course, being security, I knew a good part of them, but I didn't know them all. And there were a lot of people there, a lot of contracts going. And so I was slowly learning, where all these doors were. We had to have guards go to in case one was happened to be opened, and it showed up on the computer, and we had a control section and infrared warnings, and I had as many as 60 officers, and the fellow who was there was a former policeman who'd been doing this type of thing for 15 years, like most of them are, and said it takes at least 6 months to learn this job, then you're just a neophyte. And then right away I found out before I even turned around that he was going to leave if they didn't give him an assistant, because he thought he was being overworked. And 2 minutes. And usually we get them there within like 20, 30 seconds, because they had run all the way there. Well, the people that were involved lost their jobs too. So I figured, well, I'm going to have to be careful about this. So anyway, they were going to close down this whole facility while they moved into Long Beach, and to save money, that type of thing. So it worked out well.
How long did you do that then?
That was a very interesting assignment, but that was basically everything I've been doing.
How long did you do that?
About a year and a half.
So when did you move down here full time then?
Well, my wife was coming down to manage a beauty supply business that her brother-in-law has in Orange County. He has places throughout Arizona and New Mexico and throughout California, including one here, a big one, and fairly big. It's like a big store. But he has a great big beauty setup and so forth in Orange County. So my wife moved out to do that because she was tired of the traffic in Newport Beach. And so when I finished the security job, because I used to commute out here on weekends, which I did for maybe 4, 5, 6 months, I've forgotten. Well, as soon as that was over, I just moved out here permanently. So that was about 12 years ago, full time.
Yeah. And do you have any interests besides playing golf that you like to do?
Well, I've always had an interest in photography, and an interest in coins and stamps and so on. And I had a great opportunity to learn how to paint when I was in Germany. They had a Kunstmeister that used to teach all the ladies how to paint, and he was a real pro. He could teach any kind of painting, whether it was watercolor or mountains, cabins, ocean, you name it. And so he had one period arranged for the men, anybody that wanted to learn how to paint with paint, and become an artist on their own on Friday. So I took lessons from him for a year, and in that time I painted about 24 pictures, and I got some of them hanging in my house. And my daughter, who lives in Greenville, North Carolina, 2 daughters really, both live there because they live together. They have the rest of them, all of them, and they're not too bad. I even accept them myself. But he was just one of these people that could do it, and a number of his students, young ladies like daughters of some of the officers and so on, they turned into professional painters. So they were very good. They had the showings and the rest of it.
And you're still active in the P-38 group?
Well, I was in the presidential. I was with the outfit for I don't know. Let's see, since about 1995, and I became President Pro Tem, where if the president wasn't there for 2 years, I'd take over, because we had about 1,500 members and a full board, and we worked with the March Field Museum, which also has a full board, and of course they have quite a bit of money to do all these things. So the president at the time was Jack Purdy. Jack Purdy was the president of the Aces Association for the United States. And so they had him come in as president, so for 2 years he was president. Then he had to go back to do things because he lived in Cleveland and Phoenix and so forth. And so he put in about almost 2 years, and I filled in for him. And then I took over as president for 2 years. And so when I gave up presidency to the new president, he's what we were looking for quite some time, to find somebody with, so to speak, younger, who could carry on after the people of my age and older were gone. And he had never flown a P-38, but he had all kinds of interest in it. He had parts of different airplanes that he actually let the 475th, who also have a little museum there, have, and so he's been doing a real good job.
Okay,
That's about it.
yeah. Pete Madison, did you know Pete Madison?
Yeah, he was a very good friend of mine.
Because I think he was instrumental or one of the people involved in starting the Air Museum here.
Yeah,
in the
he
desert.
was. He was the original. I used to have what is it, kind of a sweatshirt, and it used to say museum on it. Yes, and he had an office down on the main drag, I think on Indian, where they were doing some planning.
Yes, I
but
think
then
so.
when Mr. Bond came in, he did such a beautiful job, and he had so many good ideas. Why I think that they decided why it would be better just not to worry about what Pete was doing.
Okay. So, and now you're a relatively new docent here at the museum. Have you been a new volunteer and docent? Had you been a member of the museum for a period of time?
No, but I've been asked to speak here a few times, and in fact,
we've had a couple of P-38 conventions here, I believe. Haven't the
yes.
P-38 associates have had conventions here in the valley?
Yes, the 2000 when we were here,
Right.
and so on.
Were you involved in the convention itself?
Yeah, I usually ran the golf programs every time we had something like that. Yeah. We gave away trophies and all that type of thing. It worked out very well. Yeah. And we got a lot of cooperation from the people here and from Sharon and Mr. Pond. In fact, he spoke at our last convention. And so on. He was a very good speaker. Yeah. But I've always been very proud of the museum here, and I'm very happy to be a part of it, even though right now I've only been coming on Monday morning. But I was very pleased when they said it was all right to come in and help out.
Well, we're happy to have you, that's for sure. Frank, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, I hope I didn't wear out the tapes.
No, that was great. That was great. This will be.
When I got out of the service and so on in 1964 and came back to California, I started to look for a job in in the companies around, usually in the aircraft business, like Boeing and Xerox and you name it, whatever they might be. Well, I was hired by Eastman Kodak back in Rochester, New York. And it's interesting because even though I had a top secret clearance, top secret and crypto clearance in the service, I still had to get a special clearance to be in their program. It was so top secret. And now they can talk about it because it happened to even come out in mechanical, what's that magazine that has all these mechanical stories and so on?
Mechanics Illustrated or something like that?
Popular Mechanics.
Popular Mechanics, yeah.
The Eye in the Sky project, where you could see a license plate from outer space. And Kodak had the key responsibility of making the lens for it, which were, so thick and so wide, so they were actually making the camera for that. And the plans for all that came out in Popular Mechanics in detail. So I figured, well, they finally don't have to worry too much about the top secret part. But it took me about a year to find the company I thought I would like to be with, and I almost was hired by the company that makes the 105 that was sold to all the NATO nations and so on. But they finally, I think, selected a aeronautical engineer, and of course I liked what I saw in Kodak. It was in Rochester, New York. The only problem was it was back east, and I'm kind of a Westerner. But I joined their program, and they needed somebody to put their business records together so they could negotiate with the government as to what they were going to do. Their technical negotiations, and because it was a $200 million program, and they were given a CPFF position, which is cost plus fixed fee, which hardly anybody ever gets. It means that if it's like $100 million and you have say an 8% profit, you got 8% of that $100 million, without any question, if you have that. And that's what they received. They received it on a $200 million program. And they had 2 or 3 different programs, but none as big as that. And because they had scientists that were all investigating ways to do what they had to do, you know, making these big, beautiful lenses and grinding them down and this, that, and the other, and getting all the software that they needed, they weren't talking to each other. Someone would be doing the same thing and not communicating with their fellow, which was spending money, and the government was paying for that too. So, and they'd been working on it, I think, for about 3 years, something like that, before all this happened, before they were getting ready to go in with all these other aerospace outfits in the country. And so they needed somebody that could actually open those science doors, get their records out, get them all organized so they could come out to the coast here and negotiate with the government as to what they were going to do. And once the government approved that, then we would come back for another 2 weeks to negotiate the CPFF part, so they would know what kind of a profit they were going to make for all this work that they were doing and all these things they were making. And you can imagine how big some of them were and so on, and complicated. You know, they had clean rooms, you know, where you couldn't go in unless you were in white suits, and you know, all the dust was off your feet and everything, and you had to have a special clearance to even get in and do any of that. Well, anyway, I put all that together for them, and they finally decided to bring me out here with them, so I helped in the negotiation and ran the administrative part for them, and they ended up with a $200 million program with a CPFF of, I think, 8%, which would be, what, 16 million they were just given, which is a pretty good deal, plus all the other costs that go with it. Yeah. And I guess there were follow-up things too that they received payment for. But I stayed with them, and it was in their test program, and for a total of 4 years. And then when the program went down after this popular mechanics thing, and they didn't need that anymore, why, then I decided I thought aerospace had a little bit too many politics for me, and they didn't have any fighter airplanes to fly, you know. I decided to leave. That's what I thought.
I meant to ask you, when you're volunteering on Monday mornings, what do you do here at the museum?
Well, I'm in the European hangar, which most all those airplanes I've flown. So I felt maybe I could do the most good here and help out in there. And what I want to do is get trained on the Navy aircraft a bit, so I can help out there. And the reason I figured that Monday morning might be all right is it seems to fit into our schedule, because my wife is working. And
is she still working with that beauty supply deal?
No. She left that quite some time ago. Now she works for kind of a country club housing organization that's one of these very, very nice ones, with the managers running their office when they want time off. Oh. So she's got kind of a part-time job, which she likes.
Does she play golf too?
Well, she does, but she doesn't like this cold or too hot time, so she has other things she does. Right. And anyway, what I thought is that because I can come out whenever I want, like when you have things going on the weekends or any other day or whatever, why, or I'm asked why I could come out and fill in there and be as much help without getting
Sure.
too involved in things that maybe it might not be worthwhile.
Yeah, no,
So I
that's,
don't know.
yeah, it's, I was kind of the same way when I started, because I was in the Navy for 6 years, so I started in
Oh.
the Navy hangar, but I wanted to learn the other things, so I went to the European and
Oh,
the
good.
B-17. It's kind of fun to do all this kind of thing.
Sure.
Also, it's kind of fun, sometimes in the evenings, they have these evening events, and we have volunteers that come over, and they have a big, real nice party going on, people dressed up, and music and
Yeah.
dancing and stuff, and we, so it's kind of fun to do that.
Right.
Okay, Frank, thanks
Okay.
again.